here with my new friend, Danny Sheehan, who knows probably more about every American conspiracy than anybody I know. Partly because you were involved in half of them as a public investigator and kind of people's advocate, whether it was Watergate or Karen Silkwood. Now you represent a lot of the UFO whistleblowers, Stephen Greer, Lou Elizondo, John Mack before that, who was the head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department and studied alien abductions for the last 10 years of his career. So it's an honor to have you, and I'm excited to have, I think we're going to have a pretty crazy conversation. And
terrific.
Why don't we start actually with UFOs? I think they're sort of very in the zeitgeist right now, but I think a lot of people in the UFO disclosure world feel very frustrated because last year you have David Grush from the National Geospatial Agency coming out, blowing the whistle, and literally a year ago, August of 23, saying in front of Congress that we've had
July 26th.
July 26th, that's right. Okay, good. That's amazing. Good memory. Saying that we have had a legacy reverse engineering programs. We've had crash retrievals of UFOs. We have them in our possession, in various aerospace warehouses.
Do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
Biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And it's a sort of bombshell claim, and he says that he's brought forward 40 first-hand witnesses, people who've worked on the program, to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, Monheim, and yet nothing's, not a lot has happened since. And I'm friends with Grush, and I do trust him. And I think there's a lot going on there behind the scenes. But yeah, what's your take overall on where we're at?
There's a lot going on behind the scenes. Is the answer. And one of the things that people who've worked in Washington D.C. for 20 years or more realize that the public hearings that take place in the Congress are kind of dog and pony shows, and that they're semi-scripted as a rule. There's a decision made on high as to what's going to get said publicly and what isn't, what questions are going to get asked and what aren't. And so that there's a bit of theater involved, more than a bit of theater involved. What's going on in the background is the real deal making. And the challenge in Washington, D.C., among many others, is that everything is a deal. Everything is a negotiation. So if the Republican Party proposes, $10 billion for a particular program, the Democratic Party, proposes $8 billion for the same program, ahead of time it's going to come out to $9 billion, because it's not a matter of principle. It's not a matter of what the program needs. It's a question of the kind of false dialectic that's going on. So you have to get used to that to begin with. And now we've come into the scene with the UFO phenomenon, and that there have been a number of passes at this in the history. But what's happened is, since the one that everybody knows about is the December 17th of 2017, the front page story in the New York Times. Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, and Chris Mellon, very importantly, was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, both under the Clinton administration and under the W. Bush administration. So he's kind of a bipartisan, Mellon a family guy. And Lou Elizondo was involved in the program that the Pentagon had, a secret program, above top secret, the real elements of the program, where they were attempting to develop a weapon system, an advanced weapon system, using the technology that they'd recovered from UFO craft. And the thing that people don't realize, there's this big hubbub, with the front page story in the New York Times, and everybody's saying, oh, here's two amazing whistleblowers that have come out of the shadows, and they've come forward and they've made this extraordinary set of revelations about the existence of this secret program. And it turns out the whole thing was authorized. I mean, that the United States Defense Department Office of Pre-Publication Review and Security had cleared all of those videos to be shown and had okayed the New York Times to publish them. And so there's this whole backstory going on that there's a pretense of kind of a insurrectionist kind of whistleblower kind of group coming forward to reveal this information and challenge the deep secrets of the state. But in fact, there's decisions being made deeper in to reveal some of this.
There have to be.
Yeah.
And there also it has to be this sort of limited form of disclosure that's these people are sort of coordinating.
Yep.
Because the videos, the 3 videos, you know, whether it's Go Fast or Gimbal or Nimitz, all these videos are not high quality. They're not high resolution.
They're nowhere near what they've got.
It's only one sensor, and then they say, you know, we have a lot better stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's clearly almost like a Rorschach test, or conditioning or something. It's like, how are people going to sort of react, and then maybe we'll go a little farther in a couple of years, and then maybe we'll go even farther.
Well, you have to be careful, because you can start speculating about what's going on there in the background.
I don't know.
It's hard. Well, what I've done, I got contacted by Lou Elizondo himself right after this happened.
Well, for the context for the audience, if you don't know anything about UFOs, Lou Elizondo ran an AATIP, these programs from 2007 to 2012. He also was involved in a lot of interesting kind of counter intel and recon for the U.S. and was at Guantanamo Bay at one point. I think he was deployed in Iraq. And I've been to his place in Wyoming. He's a very interesting guy. And in 2017, he came out as part of this New York Times revelation.
That's right.
He was the first kind of whistleblower to say, I ran this program. It was actually under Senator Harry Reid, who was interested in UFOs. They'd appropriated $22 million.
Yep.
Harry Reid, Ted Stevens from Alaska. And you know,
Dan Inouye.
And Dan Inouye from Hawaii.
That's right.
And they're all studying, you know, UFOs, a lot of which took place under Bigelow and on Skinwalker Ranch. So, okay, Lou Elizondo approached you.
So now you've blown out the whole audience. Nobody knows what we're talking about, right?
I have the same autistic, compulsory, you know, attention to detail that you do.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is that what's happened is that for some reason, which we can explore, but for some reason, there's been a decision that was made, you know, in 2017, at the very end of 2017, to come forward to begin a process of trying to establish control, literally, over the disclosure of the UFO information. And it actually generated an extraordinary piece of legislation that the United States Senate approved that was a 64-page bill that set up this complex process of undertaking a controlled disclosure and actually formulating a controlled disclosure campaign to go over a 7-year period to start rolling out information to the public, into the world, therefore, about what it is that the United States government knew about the UFO phenomenon and about some vaguely identified non-human intelligence.
So what you're talking about now is the Schumer amendment to the forward-looking year 2024 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. So it's the defense budget every year.
That's the one.
And it was this amendment, and it talks about non-human intelligence and the government declaring eminent domain over non-human craft that's in the possession of these, you know, private aerospace companies. And it ends up kind of dying on the vine because of Mike Johnson.
Well, not really, though, but that's the impression that, again, people
have. It got diluted. It got passed, but in a very...
Well, what happened is that one of the most important aspects of the bill did get passed, and that is ordering, here's the Congress of the United States, both the Senate and House, signed by the President, ordering all 6 of the United States military services, you know, the Army, Air Force, Navy, you know, the Space Force, all of them, and all 18 of the United States intelligence agencies. There's a lot more than just the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and the NSA. There's 18 of them, right? And then there's 32 United States Defense Department agencies. All of them were ordered by Congress and the President to take 300 days to gather together every single piece of information that they had about the UFO phenomenon and about any non-human intelligence that was understood to be responsible for the UFO phenomenon, and gather it all together, put it into digital format with an index so that it's recoverable and searchable, and have it ready by October 20th of 2024 to be turned over, the Senate bill said, immediately to the National Archives. That got changed in the House, but only in a minor way, in which they said they were to turn it over as soon as possible after having it compiled. But that whole process was extraordinarily important, and it was a key portion of the bill that the Senate passed, and that got passed by Congress. That is the law right now. So that whole process is going on right now. Okay. So the bottom line is that piece got passed. You know, the big thing in the Senate bill that did not get passed was the creation of an independent panel. There was a board of review that the Senate had proposed that be an independent board of review that got to look through all of this information and decide how much of it is going to be made public. Okay? And they put in a provision that the President of the United States could personally postpone the public revelation of any piece of information that the board chose to make public. But that was a big piece that was cut out. They didn't, the House didn't agree to allow an independent panel to review all of this information and decide how much is going to be made public. So that the information has to be gathered together and made available in the National Archives, but then it doesn't necessarily have to go anywhere. That's where we are right now. But the Senate Intelligence Committee people and the House Intelligence Committee people will get to see it. And that's a key thing. You know, to get the Congress briefed in on what it is that the executive branch has been doing all of these years, since the last 80 years, basically. It goes back to basically January 1st of 1945 is the actual operative date in the statute. Every piece of information, every phone call, every memo, every internal study, every report of a UFO sighting, every single piece of information that they have has to be put into this compendium. So
that's happening.
That's happening right now.
That's amazing. And will that be public, or that was going to be fully
That's the
private?
question. As of right now, the operative order of the Senate was that it had to be turned over immediately on October 20th to the National Archives and be made available to the members of the Intelligence Committee. Okay? The House has changed that language to be made available as soon as possible, which is a wiggle phrase. You know, the question is, how quickly are they going to turn it over? But they have to have it compiled by October 20th. So that's the law right now. And a lot of people, even in the UFO community, just think, oh, the law got gutted, it got made.
No, that's fascinating.
But this is extraordinarily
That's really important. But another very important part of the law is the idea that government is going to declare eminent domain over UFOs, the actual crafts that these aerospace companies have in their possession.
Well, they have the right to do it if they choose to.
Yeah, but that
it isn't automatic.
But that got gutted. That is no longer part of the bill. And my understanding of the behind the scenes, what might have happened is Mike Turner, who is on the
he's the chair of this House Intelligence Committee.
Chair of the House Intelligence Committee, but also represents Dayton, Ohio, which is where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is.
That is right.
All the UFO rumors are centered around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, of them holding kind of craft. And his top three donors are, I think, Lockheed. You know, I don't want to mess up the other two, but two other big aerospace companies. Yeah. And you know, he works through Mike Johnson to kind of take that out of Schumer.
Right. That's right.
And so I find that interesting. Where do you think a company like Lockheed Martin actually see, like, how do you think they see the UFO thing? Because
they see it as a profit-making potential profit. There's no doubt about how they see it.
Well, Ben Rich, who's the president of Skunk Works, their most secretive division, used to call UFOs unfunded opportunities. Yeah. And then in 2016, 2017, you know, they're working with Tom DeLonge, who's the Blink-182 frontman, and you have Rob Weiss, who is, you know, Ben Rich's successor at Skunk Works, and emails between him and Tom DeLonge that were revealed through WikiLeaks, where it's clear that Lockheed wants to, like, talk more about the UFO, you know, phenomena, but then they work through a guy like Mike Turner later, you know, last year, to kill this bill. So that feels a little schizophrenic. They sort of want to do it on their own terms, or how do they?
They want to get Congress to know enough about it, which they don't yet, to agree to set up a law that authorizes them to get patent rights. That's what they want. They want to get patent rights to the technology, so that the United States government, for the next 1,000 years, when it wants to have access to any of the technology of the UFOs for superluminal flight or anti-gravity stuff, is going to have to license it from the private company and pay them a ton of money for it. I mean, it's just absolutely, it's just avarice and greed,
Got it.
and
So
self-interest.
that makes sense. So they want like a broader public knowledge or surface area on the topic, but they don't want any of their IP taken out of the company.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
They want to make as much money as possible on it. And here we have an event taking place of the world getting ready to be made aware of the fact that there's this humongous other civilization around us in our galaxy.
What's the evidence that it's extraterrestrial and not some time traveler
the fact that people have been face to face with them and had telepathic communications.
Sure, but for everyone that says they're from Zeta Reticuli, they also say they're from the future, and they're also super deceptive and say all sorts of other crazy stuff.
Those are people in the UFO community who say all that. They kind of make up stuff. But the fact of the matter is just as plain as day.
No, but I mean, if you look at the Edgar Mitchell database, any of the databases around this stuff, I actually think it's split. Like, I don't think it's clear that they're from another planet. In fact, there's one hominid species on Earth that's sentient, upright, bipedal, that has advanced technology, and it's us. And there are 20 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy, but there are over 1 trillion non-Earth-like planets. So, and we're seeing a thing that looks like us.
Yeah.
They're hominid. So the likelihood of evolutionary convergence on a totally foreign planet is just super, super slim. And so the Occam's razor explanation would actually be that there's something emanating from, they're sort of related to mankind. And they could be interstellar, they could be a different timeline interacting with us. I just think we have to widen the aperture of possibilities.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, but not to the point of just obfuscating the obvious.
Sure. There's a thing, there's a phenomena. Yeah. But I do think that's called the phenomena for a reason, because it's sort of really hard to classify.
Well, it's because the conversation that you're talking about now has assiduously excluded all the evidence of face-to-face contact that people have had. I mean, there are thousands of people who've had face-to-face contact in telepathic communications with the actual occupants of the craft, which there's this huge effort to kind of pretend that isn't true. Like, that isn't true, because there aren't enough government-circled people and scientific community people who've affirmed it yet.
Well, that's a good segue into the first UFO-related person you represented is John Mack.
That's right.
And John Mack was the head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department, and I think he, through his friend Bud Hopkins, his childhood friend, right, started to see all these cases, these people who no mental health history.
Right.
It wasn't even always through hypnotic regressions. Right. They would just say, I had these experiences where I was abducted by these aliens, and he started to take it very seriously. And so, what do you think about John Mack and his investigations?
Well, I represented him for 10 years and met dozens of people that he had worked with, was involved in vetting them to determine which ones were credible and which ones weren't, what detailed information they had, and have talked to several absolutely, totally credible witnesses that I could put in front of any American jury, and the jury would be absolutely clear that they were telling them the truth, who have had direct face-to-face contact with one or more of these extraterrestrial beings. They have them in American underground military bases.
They have the beings.
They have the beings.
What, so
they've interviewed the beings. I've talked to people who were there when they were interviewing the beings.
Where are the beings?
That particular one was at S4.
In Area 51.
Outside of Area 51, about 11 miles away.
I would totally distrust that, but I have some good friends who are very trustworthy. So they're a couple, and the husband broke the world record for the biggest wave ever surfed in Nazaré, Portugal. His name's Garrett McNamara, and her name's Nicole, and they're very good people, and they would never lie.
Yeah.
And they have a friend who worked at Area 51, or it might be a friend of a friend, but they met him, and he was totally traumatized. And after having worked there,
Yes.
and he said that he was led down into a basement.
That's right.
And he saw reptilian creatures, and they were speaking English.
Well, they're telepathic. They're telepathic, and they talk French to French people. They talk German to German people. But they're telepathic.
But isn't that that's strange, though, right?
Strange, yes. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
So, but then, like, if they're that advanced, they're telepathic. They can fly, faster than light. Then how the hell do we corral them into underground bases against their will, or are they happy to be kept?
Well, the one of the ones that I was talking to the guy who was there when they were interviewing one of them. It was clear that it was voluntary, that the extraterrestrial being was voluntarily talking with them, was having telepathic communications. So they was being interviewed.
They're just kind of hanging out in these bases.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way.
What do they want? Why are they there?
What happened is Albert Stein was this guy's name. He called me on his deathbed. He was dying up in northern Minnesota. Called me and wanted me to come and see him right away because he was dying. And so I flew there and went and met him at the hospice. And he's sitting there with all the tubes in him and dying. And he said, look, he had to tell somebody about this, that he was United States Army, was assigned as a clerk typist to Project Blue Book. And that while Blue Book had this whole buffaloing operation going on, telling people that it was swamp gas and, birds that they had misidentified, that there were over 700 actual sightings that they found it absolutely impossible to discount, that they couldn't come up with, because too many people had seen him, there were too many corroborating witnesses, there was radar tracking and everything. And he was assigned to the group that was investigating those sightings. And he would just sit, and they'd send people out to interview all the people that had seen one of these things, and then they would come back and give him their reports, and he would type them all up. And he was there for years, and got to be close friends with the guy who was the commander of that unit. And the guy came into him after a number of years. They shared certain kind of religious views, he with the commander. And the commander came in and told him that he was going to be going to Area 51 and wanted him to come with him as the clerk typist, just to kind of monitor what they were doing. So they went to Area 51. They got taken to S4, went down a number of flights down at S4, and they came to this area where there was this a big room with a two-way mirror in it. And there was an extraterrestrial being there. He was like, 5.5 feet, almost 6 feet tall, had a kind of a light blue jumpsuit on that they'd given him, and he was standing there. And this guy, Albert, wouldn't go near him. He was just traumatized by the guy. And he said he thought he was demonic and didn't want to go near him. But his commander went in and was having this telepathic communication going on with him. And so he stayed outside, and the people that were there staffing the area, they showed him, they had these card files where they had been interviewing the being voluntarily, and he was answering questions that they had. And one of the questions was, where do you come from? And he said that he was part of a group of beings that were from different star systems in our galaxy, and that they were part of a team that were going around inside the galaxy, checking on places where life had actually begun on different planets, and they were sort of monitoring what they were doing. And they asked the follow-up question. They said, well, who's in charge of that? What kind of, they didn't say it this way, but what kind of juridical entity, is there that's coordinating this kind of a thing? And he said, well, you people would refer to it as God, but it's very different from what you think. That's what he said. And so they specifically said that they were from different star systems and different planets inside our galaxy. And there he was.
Did he go more into the God thing? How it's different than
He did. That's all. That's what he told me, and that he wanted to share that with me. And he said that he didn't believe him. He didn't believe it because he thought he was demonic, and therefore he wasn't ever going. He never told anybody about this in his life, and he was dying, so he wanted to tell me that this had happened.
This guy was on his deathbed.
Yeah.
Really? What's his name?
His name is Albert Stein.
Albert Stein. He was a
Clerk typist, U.S. Army clerk typist
for Blue Book.
Assigned to Blue Book, to this special division of Blue Book that was investigating the 700.
That's absolutely insane. Do you have a video of you talking to him? He just wanted to have me come and see him, so I went and sat and talked to him. Do you have other deathbed confessions like that?
No.
Okay.
No, I've interviews that I've done with people, live people who've had different kind of encounter experience. You know, well, for example, also, you know, Barbara Lamb. You know Barbara Lamb?
No.
Barbara Lamb was an associate of John Max.
Okay.
And she's a professional psychologist. And she had a practice of kind of helping people who had these kind of traumatic experiences of thinking, at least that they'd had a direct encounter with a landed UFO that was on the ground, that they would have a direct contact experience with the occupants. And most people find that fairly traumatic.
Yeah.
And so she ended up counseling dozens and dozens of people over a 50-year career. She's like 90 years old now. She just became 90 years old. And she's provided to us her archives of all the recordings of different people that she has had sessions with, right? And so after all these years, 50 years of interviewing dozens of people who've had this kind of experience, she was kind of longing as she was approaching 90, kind of wishing she'd get to see one. You know, she'd never seen a UFO. She'd never seen a being. She was kind of lamenting this. And then one afternoon, she came in out of her garden into her house, and here was this reptilian guy standing in her living room. You know, just standing right in the middle of her living room, and she was kind of taken aback. But he was giving off really kind of extremely friendly, positive kind of vibes. He wasn't scaring her at all, you know. But he came over toward her, and he said, "Look, you have been wanting to get to see one of us, and here I am. So I'm just wanting to let you know you've been doing this a long time, and so that here I am." And then he turned around and left.
Do you have any takes on the UFO thing that very few people agree with you on, or that, you know, are really out of left field sounding to the average person or something?
All of them are out loud left field.
Yeah, I mean, but in a world where like it's actually seen as somewhat conventional to believe in at least the phenomena itself, do you have any sort of really contrarian takes on how this stuff works, or?
No, what I do believe is that it has an awful lot to do with consciousness.
Yeah.
That they're monitoring us, trying to gauge our state of evolution of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because that's a very big deal.
Yeah.
To them.
Yeah. I agree with that.
You know, they use it to drive their craft, to navigate. They telepathically communicate. You know, that this whole thing of the level of consciousness that we're at is really important to them.
Do you think legacy programs have made any sort of progress on this stuff?
It's kind of a branch office of it, which is the remote viewing stuff that Hal Puthoff and the Targ and those guys have been involved in.
Do you think that's still in effect? And
oh yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really sophisticated stuff. I mean, really sophisticated stuff.
What gives you conviction there? I mean, obviously, it pops up in skinwalkers at the Pentagon that they're studying it, you know, as part of AATIP and OSAP or whatever. But like that, to me, is small fish. You know, it's not a lot of money.
It's a big deal. In that, you know, when you know what they accomplished in that program, which they're lying about to everybody, say, oh well, you know, it didn't get very far. They couldn't. They kind of shut it down.
So what do you think they actually accomplish?
Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Because I've read the whole file on it.
Or you're just talking about like Joseph McMoneagle?
No, I'm talking about Pat Price.
Okay. What happened with Pat Price again?
Pat Price was such an accomplished remote viewer.
Yeah.
That they actually he got to a point where this one particular thing, and the reason I saw this parenthetically is that I was asked to be the attorney for L. Ron Hubbard.
You were?
In the Church of Scientology.
No way.
Yeah.
So how would you connect Scientology and remote viewing? I mean, I know Hal Puthoff was a Scientologist for some time, but
Hal Puthoff was, and so was Pat Price, and so was Ingo Swann. Were high-level clears of the Church of Scientology. The FBI and the Justice Department in New York subpoenaed the top 10 people in the Church of Scientology in New York and ordered them to come in front of a grand jury. And they were going to be interrogating them in front of the grand jury. They called me again, and I went up to New York because I'm admitted in the Southern District, and I got an injunction shutting them down. So they couldn't do that because it was totally unconstitutional again. And so they were so sort of enamored of me that they talked with Ron Hubbard, and Ron Hubbard wanted to have me be the lawyer for them, you know, with him and his wife Susan, you know, against the IRS, that whole thing they were doing. So I said that, look, I wouldn't even meet with Ron Hubbard unless there was a condition precedent that I could be given access to every single document anywhere in the world in the internal files of the Church of Scientology. I figured that was a real non-starter, right?
yeah, of course.
And within a week, they came back and said, it's a deal.
No way.
What do you want to see? And so
you could query anybody's e-meter results?
Yeah, anything. I could get anything I wanted. And so they flew me down to Florida, and the big blue cube they've got down there, this big, huge blue building. So I go in, and there's the head of the Guardian's office, U.S. Guardian's office, and the international head of the Guardians, you know, out of the UK. And they say, so what do you want to see? And I said, well, first, what I want to see is the file you've got on me. And the American guy said, no, I don't, no. And I said, excuse me. I said, what do you think? I fell off some melon wagon somewhere? I said, you know, you're going to have me to be L. Ron Hubbard's attorney, and you don't have any file on me at all? And the international guy says, go get him the file. You know, so they bring me the file. I'm going through.
How deep was it? How much stuff did they have?
Well, they had you know, pictures of me. What was I? You know, I was a Jesuit candidate. I was at the headquarters. You know, they would follow me around. They showed me in different restaurants. You know, and meeting with people. You know, Mark Lane and some of the other guys. You know, they
Mark Lane. He was like Kennedy assassination investigator.
Yeah, Rush to Judgment. He was the author of that. You know, so you know they had all these kind of things. And so I said, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that it was accurate. You know, and then so the international guy says to me, okay, so what else do you want to see? I said, I want to see the 3 most sensitive files in the entire world, according to you, as the head of the Guardian's office. You know, and he just went, oh, fuck, he said. I said, so either you get them or not. You know, so he gets up and is gone, and Reveling is around, comes back, and he ends up laying one of the files in front of me. And I started looking at it, and it was all reports by Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann was filing reports with the head Guardian office in the UK about the entire internal operations of the Office of Naval Intelligence remote viewing program that they were doing. He was just giving them all the information.
So he was a spy or something?
Yeah, no, he was a spy for the Church of Scientology.
For the Church of Scientology?
Over and against the Office of Naval Intelligence.
Why would he do that?
Because he was a high-level clearer. That was his loyalty group. His
so
fundamental loyalty.
He was loyal to them prior to.
That's right. That's right. Over and above.
Because I always thought Puthoff was like looking into that stuff because he was like an NSA guy before he was a Scientology guy. So I thought Puthoff was just like tasked to like looking into this, you know, very para-governmental intelligence organization that is Scientology that's seen as a threat, and so get Puthoff in there.
No, this was a stuff. I mean, the Church of Scientology. You're not aware of it. That their highest principle in the Church of Scientology is all to do with UFOs.
Really?
So, they believe that there is a major confrontation going on between the human-like people from the Pleiades over and against the reptilians from Zeta Reticuli, and that there's a major confrontation going on over which of them is going to actually assert major relations with our planet.
Do you agree with that worldview?
No, I don't.
But Swann was like fully in with the Scientologists
Oh,
and
yeah.
was giving
He
them
too.
information on the Office of Naval Intelligence.
All of it.
And so you're also saying that there's a remote viewing program that was deeper than Stargate, because that wasn't Office of Naval
No,
Intelligence. That was
that's right.
DIA after CIA.
Yep. No, this was a program. And Pat Price, I'll give you some idea how deep this goes. Pat Price, they had the file. Ingo Swann had the file that Pat Price had gotten so good at remote viewing that they assigned him a task of, they gave him the exact longitude and latitude down to the minute and second of a location, and he was assigned an artist so that he didn't have to do these hen scratches trying to show it. But he was saying, so what's there? So there's this major building here, and there's big fence up with razor wire on the top of it and everything. And his facilitator was Russell Targ. And so Russell was saying, okay, now can you get inside the fence? Can you see anything inside the fence? And he goes, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, I can see inside the fence. And there's just this no man's land there. Can you get to the front door of this place? And he said, all right. He said, okay, all right, I got it. Yeah, okay, I'm in front of the front door. He said, can you go inside the building? And he said, let me see here. Okay, yeah, I can see inside the building here. He said, so what do you see? He says, this big long hallway. And there's some doors on both sides. And Russell said, now go down to the third door on the left. He said, okay. He said, can you go into the room? Yeah, I can go into the room. So what do you see? Well, there's a big desk there and chairs and stuff. There's a big file cabinet over in the right corner over here. Go over to the file cabinet. So he goes over to the file cabinet. There's a second drawer, first file. Read it to me. And he did.
What was it?
Well, that's not the point. The point is that he did it.
Yeah.
And he can do it. It turns out it's an American facility. It's a top CIA security facility.
Yeah, but that's insane then. So
Yeah.
anybody with remote viewing skills can get the nuclear codes?
Not anybody, but Pat Price could.
The best.
So that's Pat Price, right? And in the same file, it points out that Pat Price had actually evolved to the point where they could take a full photograph of a boomer-class Russian submarine, nuclear submarine, and show it to him and say, where is it? Right now. And he would give him right down to the exact longitude and latitude, down to the minute and second of exactly where that is. And he visualized the whole thing and told him exactly where it was. But there was a huge UFO right over the top of the water where that thing was. And it was tracking it and monitoring it. And he had it in the file. I'm going, whoa! I said, this is pretty wild. And then I said, okay. So what else have you got? He says, well, here. And I said, show me the second file. And he showed me the second file, and it was again from Ingo Swann. It was a deep inside report from Ingo Swann that they had taken Pat Price in the program up to southern Canada, south central Canada, just north of the state of Michigan. And he brought him to this little facility. It was like this little domed little building, and it had these big, huge dishes on top, these communication dishes on top. And they brought him in, and they set him down, and they put this helmet on him, and they had him think a particular message. And they turned all the big antenna down to the northern peninsula of Michigan, that little section that's in there, and had him be telepathically projecting, when it comes time for you to file your national, your U.S. income tax forms next year, file them in this little post office box down in this little town down in West Virginia. And 85% of the people did it next year.
No way.
Absolutely way.
That's insane.
You keep saying that.
So you're saying Scientology had some sort of mass mind control technique.
No, it wasn't the Church of Scientology.
What was it?
This was the program.
That was the program, the Office of Naval Intelligence.
This was the program.
But that's like, the implications of that are crazy.
They're profound.
Yeah.
Not quite crazy.
Well, it's crazy for the average person.
Do you think that there is a part of our government that interacts systematically with this other life form? Because, like, if you watch the movie Contact, Jodie Foster walks into this plane, and it's almost like the implication is this guy who's been like kind of tracking her, but he's part of this strata of the world that's just very elite, and he kind of interfaces with multi-billionaire guy.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the case in our world?
I'd put it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I have no doubt whatsoever, zero doubt that there's an element inside our government structures that is part of the intelligence community, is part of the military, that have direct knowledge about the existence of these extraterrestrial beings that are here on the planet.
But are they systematically in touch with them? Like, do we have treaties or agreements? Or
that's a question of degree now. The question then would be is that in light of the fact that they know that they're here, that it would be almost impossible to believe that they hadn't made efforts to have some kind of communication with them.
Sure.
They aren't going to just let them sit there.
Would you take that a step farther, though, and say that we've made agreements?
You have to take it one step at a time. That I think that they clearly would have made the effort to have communication with them. So the next question you have to ask is it reasonable to believe that the beings would have communicated with them at all? There does seem to be some sort of a tacit understanding that they have about being able to coexist in some way, whereby the United States government isn't going to just run out and say, oh, everybody, there's beings from another system, star system here on our planet. So they obviously have got some sort of protocol established here where they're not going to be revealing it, and the beings themselves are not just going to land in Central Park and tell everybody.
Why do you think the UFO stuff needs to come out? Is there a forcing function? Because I go back and forth myself where, I think actually people who know me well are surprised that like I'm as skeptical as I am, even though like I do all these interviews or whatever, where it just feels like a lot of the thinking is really lazy and poor. We talked earlier about the example of like, there are just so many psyops and stuff. So I was sitting in the UFO hearing and I was just like, these people don't know anything. Like honestly, I had two thoughts simultaneously. One is I'm so moved that this is happening. This is amazing. This is a watershed moment. Yes. And then on the other hand, if you wanted to pull off a psyop on these people, on like the government itself, on the civilian government, it would be easy.
Yeah.
Because they have no idea, they're getting spoon-fed all sorts of
That's
stuff.
Exactly
I actually was with a friend yesterday who told me, and I'll keep him anonymous, but he's a prominent professor at a pretty well-respected university who looks at this stuff kind of behind the scenes, the UFO stuff.
Yeah.
And he was talking about evidence given to a congressional staffer. The congressional staffer gave it to him and some of his hardcore ufologist friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is a hoax from 30 years ago." And the staffer went pale in the face because he was so sure that he was given this stuff in a classified setting in a skiff, as if it was real.
Yeah.
And so this is like kind of crazy.
So you got your finger right on it right now, Jesse. Is that the level of non-competence?
Yeah.
On the part of all human beings, all organizations, is more than their image they project.
Yes.
That they've got a whole marketing thing of, here's who we are, how effective we are, how perfect we are, et cetera. Yeah. But if you really become more and more familiar with the details of it, you really realize that there are all kinds of vulnerabilities that organization had.
The thing that actually makes me think there's a there is there are like a lot of pretty serious people involved. I've become decently close with Carl Nell, and like I consider Grush a really good friend at this point.
Sure.
And it's like these guys are pretty hardcore guys. They're very knowledgeable, and it's like a big waste of human resources if it's just a psyop. And so the question is there some sort of forcing function that is causing the program itself to allow some of these defectors out because they realize this thing is bursting at the seams and they need to get in front of it or something, and so
good start. This is a good start.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Because my belief is like I take at face value and fully trust David Grush when he says that he sort of stumbled upon this stuff, and then where I think people are maybe a little naive, and I kind of hinted at this in my interview with Grush, is like whatever the defection is from the internal program has to be somewhat coordinated. These people have no immunity because they haven't come out. And so, like, the idea that they don't have some authoritative auspice under which they're operating, you know, they'd all be dead if they weren't. And so there's somebody somewhat in charge in whatever programs that do exist, you know, they've said you can come out to this degree. That would be my mental model. Controlled disclosure.
That's the key to it all.
And then the question is, are we just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg looks nothing like the bottom of the iceberg, or does the tip of the iceberg resemble the bottom of the iceberg? So we're getting a snapshot of what we knew maybe in the late 40s or early 50s, and we're getting some sense of greater ontological truth, and it's just, you know, kind of we're working our way down into some core truth.
I can see all these little 3x5 cards going up on the wall. You know, that you're kind of laying them out here. Here's the possibilities. There's this and this. It's all true. You got to get them all up in front of you.
Yeah.
And all the things that you're saying are things that merit exploration. You know, and some of them are internally and self-referentially consistent. Some of them aren't.
Yeah.
You know, so that you can drop some of them down into different baskets that are consistent with each other.
Yeah.
That's how you go about doing this.
Yeah.
You know, and that obviously I've thought about all these things, you know, and representing Lou and in talking with Carl and talking with David and, you know, and discussing these things with them, you know, but I consistently refuse to get a security clearance.
Yep.
I will not do that because then whatever I know about, they're going to try to say I must have gotten it through the security clearance and then I can't tell anybody.
Right.
You know, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I know more than a lot of them do.
You're a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, or a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, to be exact.
I admired John Mack a lot. He seemed like a very earnest, good guy.
Yeah, he was.
What do you think his mission was at the end of his life? Like, do you think it was just to kind of destigmatize things for kind of the you know, victims or abductees in these cases, or was it to spread some sort of new worldview that he had? Or
well, he had at least two different missions. You know, he was running the peer group, the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, in that I was legal counsel for the group. That was where I got to meet lots of experiencers and help vet those people. And John and I had both decided, more or less at my suggestion actually, as it turns out, to try to train them. That if they're going to get repeatedly abducted, you know, why don't we train them to do holotropic breathing and just stay calm when it starts to happen, and then question the ET people, and we'll give you a set of questions to get information from them, you know, so that we can start getting direct line, have like a diplomatic reach out to these people.
did they get anything interesting?
No, well, what it was is that she studied Karen, and it was that she was furious at the UFO people because she'd been abducted, and then after she'd been returned and couldn't remember exactly what happened, she found that she was pregnant. And she hadn't been with anybody for like over a year. She couldn't understand what was going on. And she was pregnant, went all the way through to the end of the first trimester. And she was going to the obstetrician and she couldn't figure out what was going on. And then she gets abducted again, and she's not pregnant anymore. And she was just furious about this, about what they were doing with her. So whenever they would show up again, she would actually throw things at them. She would like throw lamps at them and, you know, kick them and throw things at them. And she was outraged at these guys, right? And she was one of the people that John was interviewing. She came to work with John. So we agreed she's a good candidate to kind of get her trained, to get her to calm down and do all that. And we did that. And the next time it started happening, she used to say the hair would kind of start to stand up on her arms, and she could get this weird feeling that it was getting ready to happen again, so she could tell. And so she started doing the holotropic breathing, and so these three little dudes show up, you know, in her living room. They brought her onto the craft, you know, totally conscious now about it, and they have to take off all of her clothes and get in this pool, this kind of like pool filled with this kind of gelatin, kind of weird aqua-colored gelatin stuff, and she'd get in, and she had to breathe it in and fill her lungs up with it, and stay under there for a while, and it was a very weird experience.
Yeah.
And then they bring her to this other place. They took her off the craft and brought her to this. She didn't see the environment. She didn't see what was going on outdoors. But and there was this little hybrid, like 2-year-old girl with kind of stringy hair and kind of big eyes, and
Wow.
but she knew instantaneously that that was her daughter.
You know, the critique everybody has of the UFO thing is they say it's not scientific because it's inherently ephemeral. It's not repeatable. I disagree. Yeah. They say there are no patterns.
That's not true.
There are patterns.
Sure,
And
there
the
are.
two patterns that I have noticed are, one is people who are in heightened states of consciousness or engaging in specific protocols or whatever, or the nuclear connection. You have 170 ICBM security personnel, radar operators, people who work at nuclear bases across the United States who have to be the picture of mental health. In fact, many of them are on the PRP program, the personal reliability program, where they have to report if they're on ibuprofen because they're guarding the crown jewels of the United States defense. They hit the wrong button. It's not good for us. And they claim to have consistently see anomalous objects in the skies around their nuclear bases. In fact, there's a really great book called The UFOs and Nukes by a guy named Robert Hastings, where he chronicles all of this stuff. He's a super hard-headed, detail-oriented guy. And there was even a case as late as 2010, right after he retired in 2008, at F.E. Warren in Wyoming, where there was an outage for an hour, and Wired magazine wrote it up. And they're like, there's an outage at a nuclear base? Like that's a big deal in and of itself. Hastings back-channeled with the missileers there, and they were all like, there was a tic-tac shaped object, oblong object flying in the sky, and that caused the outage. And time again, you hear of all of these cases, and those guys' careers have been hit because of reporting this, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations continuously shows up and kind of makes their life a living hell after they experience this. So anyways, to the people that say this isn't sort of a repeatable thing,
it's not true.
It's not true.
It's just that they're ignorant.
I
mean, the only thing worse than being ignorant is being ignorant and then arrogant about it. And that's the way a lot of the people are. And so that what I've said is I've just ignored that. I say, if a person is ignorant, you don't have to beat up on them over it. They're just ignorant. And you don't have to be insulting to them, because if they're ignorant, they don't know it. And so they think you're wrong when you accuse them of being ignorant. So there's no advantage to that. But there's a whole other level of people in our human family that are not ignorant, that follow protocols and try to figure out what's really going on. And that's what we're talking about here. And one of the most important issues that this element of our human family deal with is the UFO issue. And the reality is that it mixes in with these psychic faculties. And that so even though you have something as, dare I say, prosaic as extraterrestrial beings who have been like 2 billion years more technologically advanced than we are and psychically advanced than we are, who happen to have been figured out how to come and go from our planet, okay, bang, but then there's all this other stuff. There's all this other strange phenomenon that goes on our planet that exists at this other level of insight, such as the capacities of our human family to have telepathy and teleportation and astral travel and remote viewing and transmutation of matter. But what we've done is we've culturally riveted on some of these beings in the past, like Jesus or Lao Tzu or the Buddha, and say, wow, look what these individuals have done. And what they do is they build up a complete religion around these people. And then a tenet of the religion is that you can't do this. This one individual person could do this. And therefore there's something super non-human about them. They're transcendental. They're spiritual. They're from untouchable. They're from some other domain somewhere. It's not true. What they are is they're mutations of our human family. That as this faculty is evolving in our human family, certain individuals have it more fully evolved than others, and they attract attention when this happens. That's what's going on. As I say, this is another element that really intelligent, thinking, careful people who are not ignorant are interested in.
So you're saying it's almost the meta layer or the source code of religion in some ways.
Yes,
is
there's
this.
no doubt about that.
And it's funny because you probably know Diana Pasulka, who's a religious studies professor at UNC Wilmington. She originally wrote a book called Heaven Can Wait about Catholic purgatory, and specifically she was chronicling a lot of divine intervention, quote unquote, experiences from, you know, brothers, nuns, people associated with the church,
Yes.
people who were, you know, seen in her eyes as fairly credible witnesses. And she would actually go back to the Greek and Latin of the translations, and she would consistently find that there was almost a one-to-one match between that and the description of, you know, if you read John Mack's Abductions, you know, book, it was the same thing. It was like an orb showing, like St. Francis of Assisi, you just sees an orb showing up, and you know, he has radiation damage. And so, you know, maybe we're actually uncovering sort of the source code of a lot of these sort of quote-unquote divine experiences.
No, that is true.
Do you think that the angels and demons kind of nomenclature that's just been used, you know, across civilizations, that might just be it? And the reason I ask is because there's a book called Final Events by a guy named Nick Redfern, and he talks about there's this evangelical Christian group that was very embedded in the CIA called the Collins Elite, and they were at Wright Airfield, and they were studying demonic entities, and they were doing all sorts of weird Kabbalistic stuff, and they were attracting these sort of, you could say, similar to, you know, the protocols of Iamblichus, like Neoplatonists, or Thomas Aquinas's kind of angel hierarchies, these, you know, beings between us and God, which have been believed in for centuries. And they then came out of that study saying, this stuff is demonic, it's evil. You know, maybe we are actually living the book of Revelations, and this stuff showing up is, you know, greater preponderance is actually really bad, and they started to campaign against it.
Well, there are different lenses through which a worldview that you can perceive this thing, and there's no doubt that is one of them. You know, that is one of the lenses through which they're perceiving this entire operation.
Which is that scary? Are we at the end of history or something? That feels like sort of a paradigm shift.
No, it is a paradigm shift. But that doesn't mean you're at the end of history. It means that there's sort of a full glottal jump, you know, in consciousness. That's what's happening right now. And it's generating a lot of instability, and people are becoming, you know, disconnected to reality, and not trusting in facts anymore, and speculating wildly, and you know, trying to figure out what's going on. You know, and the UFO phenomenon is an integral part of that. And the whole relationship of psychic capacities of our human family are directly related to this, you know, and the whole issue of religions, trying to figure out, you know, whether there's some new religion that is birthing here that relates this. But remember that religion, the Latin root of religion is relegare, which is like to relink. And ever since the evolution of the intellect in our species of Homo sapiens, the intellectus, the Latin root of intellectus is the ability to distinguish the difference between. And so that we've been able to experientially experience the difference between ourselves and all the rest of our environment, and that we've developed an intellect that is able to manipulate that and kind of computerize it and mathematize it and all of that, and primarily to manipulate physical reality around ourselves.
Do you think, you know, it almost feels like the most underrated narrative here, it's not as much maybe about the crafts that we're trying to reverse engineer, but it's about the people that seem to attract this phenomena. And so like Betty and Barney Hill's this famous, you know, case in 1961, you know, they see this craft coming, I think it's in Vermont or New Hampshire. New Hampshire, that's right. And C.D. Jackson, who's in the Psychological Strategy Board under Eisenhower, and also runs kind of our psychological warfare program.
During the war,
During the war.
And was the editor-in-chief of Life magazine.
There you go. Henry Luce.
Yes.
He goes to New Hampshire and meets with Betty and Barney Hill. And so there's this special interest on the part of the government among the people who've been contacted. Now you have this guy, Chris Bledsoe in North Carolina, who, like, you have this guy, Jim Semivan, who's a hardcore intel guy, top-ranking CIA official, who's, you know, 20-year intel career, and he's why is he showing up at Chris Bledsoe's house and asking him what he's, you know, Chris Bledsoe says he's encountered this divine feminine figure that says she's come from the dark side of the moon. Is Semivan just wasting his time, spending time with him? It almost feels like people are the conduit for this like esoteric information, and there's a strata of intel that's interested in the people themselves.
All of that's true.
Like Greer, for example, who you worked with, he started doing these C5 protocols and attracting the sort of alien stuff, and then you have Albert Stubblebine and John Alexander get in touch with him, and it's almost like they're trying to recruit him into something. Like they become very interested in him because he's an attractor of this stuff.
You're getting warm now.
Okay, so what does all this mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, what it means is that there's a very definite psychic connection here. What we as human beings, Homo sapiens, refer to as psychic capacities. You know, telepathy, precognition, remote viewing capacities. There's a whole series of charisms they're basically referred to in the Hindu stuff as siddhas. You know, which is they're a function of consciousness. Is that clearly our human species is capable of experiences that are non-normal.
Yes.
Regular normal people don't have these experiences, or at least they don't realize it. My first year of law school, I had come up from Harvard College, had gone across the street to the law school, and I had heard that Crane Brinton, who was the chairman of the Department of Intellectual History at Harvard for like 30 years, and he was going to be doing his last lecture, and he said, he got up and he said, you know, I've been asked to lecture on what I think the most important single intellectual insight of our human family is that I've encountered in my 50 years. And he said, and this is easy. He said, I think that all the greatest minds of our human family have come to realize that our human family is right on the brink of its next step in biological evolution. And that we're going to be evolving from Homo sapien into the next stage of our biological evolution. And the key factor that is going to differentiate the next species from us is this evolution of this faculty. There's a faculty like seeing or hearing that is able to directly and immediately experientially access a certain vibrational frequency that exists in the universe, like light or like sound, but that there's an extraordinarily subtle bonding phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. And that this is discernible. It's extraordinarily subtle, but there's a faculty that is evolving by means of which we can access this experience. And when one has this experience, it's like a crystal set locking into a kind of a radio signal, and that you lock into this unitive phenomenon in the universe, and it can download all kinds of information to you non-linearly, like seeing or hearing. He said in that this faculty, we're at the brink of moving into this new species. He said, and I think he said to us all, this is 1968, right? This is like May of 1968. And he says, and I think that's why so many of you young men here refuse to go fight in this war in Vietnam.
Ah, wow.
That's what he said to us in that lecture.
So he's saying that, like, you know, Pierre Desjardins, like the
I know Pierre very well, as a matter of fact.
The new sphere.
Yeah, noosphere.
Like the sort of mental sheath
around
the Earth that you can sort of tap into.
Yeah,
where the Russian cosmists sort of believed in something similar.
Yeah, so do the Chinese.
Interesting.
This first thing that Dr. Zhen Zhoujing showed me. Dr. Zhen Zhoujing, who's head of the Chinese Academy of Social Science, that they've got this faculty in Beijing, 300 of the top professors in all fields that are there for the Politburo. And I met her, that I was chairing for the State of the World Forum for Gorbachev and for James Baker at the end of the Cold War, that I chaired a thing called the Strategic Initiative to Identify the New Paradigm. And I met her in that context, and she invited me to come to China. And as soon as I showed up, the first thing she did is she brought me to the laboratory, showing me all these experiments they were doing with psychic abilities. And they were exploring and trying to figure out what all this was. And so that this is a very real thing that our human family is going through right now. It's a transition period into a kind of a new paradigm. And the UFO stuff is part of it, you know?
Well, aerospace has been very interested in parapsychology, mind over matter, for a very long time.
Yes.
They've sort of hidden it. But like you have James McDonnell, who's the patron of McDonnell Douglas. He had a parapsychology institute in the 60s. You had, I think he was actually pretty close with Bob John, who was the dean of engineering at Princeton, who went on to start the Princeton anomalies, pair. And
this is extraordinarily important.
it's really important.
And people who guffaw at it and poke fun at it and stuff are just not only ignorant, but they're arrogant.
I just had a call with, I'll delete this I'll ask him if I can put this in here, but the head of revolutionary technologies at Skunkworks. I think this is okay to say because he's on record sort of believing in this stuff, but he's head of like the program that like our most important recon aircrafts just on an objective level come out of. And he believes in all this stuff. He I think is on record.
If he didn't, he shouldn't be in this position.
Totally. No, exactly. If anything can procure an advantage for them, they have to be studying it.
Yeah.
And so, it's very interesting just how interested they are in this sort of mind over matter stuff. And it's almost like a cleavage between academia, which shut down all ideas around parapsychology in the 70s through 90s, and then aerospace, where it's like, it's just basic game theory. You have to do anything to get an advantage, where they really went way deeper into parapsychology, and then academia is stuck in string theory, which is this stupid abstract math that hasn't gotten us anything. It hasn't shipped any product.
They're still stuck in the scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview.
That's right.
It's institutionalized at the academy, at the university level, and therefore you can't get cutting edge exploration on the part of some of the better minds of our human family. They won't allow it.
Yes.
Philosophy, theology, and any of them, you can't go there.
Yes.
And so that's why you have these other, like that we have a relationship with the New Paradigm Institute, or it's called Ubiquity University. They're accredited in Europe, but they can't get accredited here in the United States because they talk about this stuff. And saying, look, we've got to get intelligent minds working on this in some systematic way.
It's so absurd. We spend $15 billion on a Large Hadron Collider, and you have the possibility that there's a mind-matter interface, that kind of our Cartesian dualist ideas are just totally off. And it's like maybe, sub 50 million has been spent on, parapsychology in the last 100 years. Of course you're not going to make progress.
I know.
And maybe that's by design. I don't quite know.
And they're still lighting like rocket fuel on fire and burning it,
chemical combustion,
to shoot a rocket up into the, and they're spending billions of dollars on that as a front operation.
You think it's a front? So you think like SpaceX is a front?
Totally.
For what?
For what's really known about the way that these craft really work.
Right, but then are we operating the craft then, or when you say it's a front?
No, it's interesting that they obviously ran into a major problem that they weren't able to pilot the craft because it's consciousness that pilots the craft.
Like this hybridization of the person and the craft, which makes sense if you look at a random event generator. You have basically the mind affecting random kind of quantum mechanical processes like quantum tunneling or radioactive isotope decay. So, you have this almost like perfect digital coin flip created. You have one and a zero that's showing up on a screen, but it's tied to this perfect random quantum mechanical process. And an observer is present, and they can statistically, beyond the standard deviation, sway it between 1 and 0. And so maybe there's something about the ability to pilot the craft that requires a certain level of internal harmony or consciousness.
You're extrapolating on the point I was making. Is that they weren't able to fly them. They've got them, but they can't fly them.
Have you ever seen a UFO?
No.
Have you ever
seen photographs?
You've seen a picture of a UFO?
Photographs.
Where have you seen a picture of a UFO?
In the classified files of Project Blue Book.
You got to go through the files of Blue Book? So Blue Book, for the audience, was the Air Force's investigation into UFOs under astronomer J. Allen Hynek from the 50s and the 60s, 52 to 69. And really, you were able to go through, weren't those classified files?
They were.
How were you able to see them? Were you in a kind of a skiff, a compartmentalized facility, or?
No, it was they brought them to the a basement offices of the Madison building of the National Archives, back before the building was open. The building had just been finished in the early spring, January of '77, and I was the special counsel to the study that was being done at the request of President Carter.
What was the study?
Well, you just have to back up a bit. When President Carter, remember, had seen a UFO in 1969, I believe it was.
With a bunch of other people.
Yeah, a bunch of people, 11 other people. They were standing on the steps of this Lions Club.
Although I think that sighting may have been debunked since.
No, it wasn't. No, it hasn't been. That what he saw. It was only like 1,000 yards away. It wasn't like a big star in the sky or any of that weird stuff. It was like a UFO, and he was very specific about it.
He talked about it. Yeah, there's an interview where he talks about it.
Yeah, and he filed a report about it with the Air Force and stuff, with NICAP at the time. And so that when he was elected in the first week of November of 1976, the first thing he did was he sent for the head of the Central Intelligence Agency to come down to Plains, Georgia, even before he had gone to Washington. So he was still at his home down in Georgia, and asked the CIA person to come to brief him on the UFO issue. And it turns out that person was George H.W. Bush, who had been appointed by Gerald Ford, who had come in taking over for Nixon when Nixon resigned over the Watergate thing.
There's a rumor that Jimmy Carter saw the UFO files and was shocked by them and in tears or very distraught.
It's a rumor.
Is that BS or
a rumor? Is the most it's arisen to that. So when Carter was inaugurated on the 21st of January in '77, one of the first things he did is he contacted Congress and told them that the agency had refused to brief him. He didn't want to have a war with the CIA, and spend all that political capital trying to engage with them on this. And so he asked the Congressional Science and Technology Committee to contact the Congressional Research Service and have them do a special research project for him on what all the information was that our United States government had about the UFO phenomenon. And about whether or not there was any connection with extraterrestrial intelligence. He asked both things. And so that I ended up being contacted by Dr. Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service. And she asked if I would be special counsel to the project. And I agreed to do that. And there's 2 or 3 steps involved here, because I don't want people to get the wrong impression that the reason that she asked me to be special counsel to the investigation was specifically she wanted me to contact the Vatican archives and see, as the general counsel for the Jesuit National Headquarters in their social ministry office, whether I could get access to the Vatican archives and find out for the Library of Congress and for the President what information they had. And so I checked with my superiors at the Jesuit headquarters and got permission to do that. And so I agreed to be special counsel. So I contacted the Vatican and asked if they would give me access to the archives. And they said no. So I was kind of taken aback by that. And so I wrote them a second letter with the authority of the Jesuit headquarters, and they re-explained it in more detail, what we were doing and why we were doing it. And they still said no. And so I contacted Dr. Marshall Smith and told her that it's not going to happen. They won't do it. So I figured that was it. That was my sole role as the special counsel. But then she called me back a couple of weeks later, and she said, the new Congress that's come in with President Carter, the House of Representatives cut out half of all of the budget for SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so she said that she's helping to organize a group of astronauts to go to the key members of Congress at the House of Representatives to advocate putting the full budget back in. Would you agree to do that? Would you agree to go with them as the legal counsel for the Jesuit headquarters? So I did. I went with Rusty Schwab and a whole bunch of the Schweiker, a bunch of the other folks, and we went around and talked to the Congress people, and they put the money back in. And so Dr. Marshall Smith called me and said, "Oh, the scientists at the SETI project are super excited. They're really happy. They're very thankful for you to help on this thing. They want you to come and give a closed-door seminar to them on the theological implications of contact with an extraterrestrial civilization." So the bottom line is that I get asked by Dr. Marshall Smith to go out and do this seminar to the top 50 scientists at SETI. So I say to her, I said, look, if I'm going to go do this, I'd like to really have you get me some access to some of the stuff that you're getting and gathering for the president, that you're putting together, so I can be better briefed on, what we're doing here to talk with them. And she said, well, okay, what would you like to have? And I said, oh, I want to have the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And she said, oh, they're not ever going to give that to us. And I said, well, you won't get it unless you ask. I said, here you are doing this for the president. Just, if you would, ask them so I can see them. And she said, well, okay, I'll ask. And she called me back, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 days later or more. And she calls back and she said, well, she's totally surprised that they agreed that I could see them. So I did. I get my suit on, I bring my little lawyer briefcase, I bring the whole 9 yards, I bring my passport and my Washington, D.C. driver's license. I go over to the Madison building, and I would come there, and I think it was a Saturday morning, and here are these 2 suits there, these big no-neck tough guys kind of suit. They're not Air Force. Those are not Air Force guys. I don't know. They couldn't quite tell who they were, but looked like SF guys. And so they are kind of gruff, and they checked my ID out. I showed them the ID and stuff. And they said, all right. So they lead me into the hallway, and they say, okay, you go down the hallway here to your right. Go down there and take the elevator down and go down to the basement, and you'll see them. So I said, all right. So I go down the hallway and I get in the elevator and I start down the elevator, and it's just an instinctive thing I did. I opened up my briefcase and took out a yellow pad, a legal pad, and closed up my briefcase, and I put the yellow pad under my arm, and I come down to the basement floor, and I get out of the elevator, and there's no lights on like in the hallway or anything, but I could see down the hall. I could see down to the left. I could see a light out of a room with the door open. So down I go. I got down there, here are these 2 other suits, 2 other guys there, right? And they both check my ID and stuff, and they say, okay, you gotta leave the briefcase here and stuff. You can't go in, you can't take any notes, you can't record anything, but here's the room. And so I walk in the room, and I say it's like about 20 feet wide and about 12, 15 feet deep, and there are these 3 cardboard kind of card tables, there in the room, and they had these boxes, little cardboard boxes, like they were big, like big shoe boxes. Like they're bigger than a shoebox, and they were this kind of pale green with a little string tie on them, and so and they had a microfiche machine was there, and so I go and sit down, and I take the yellow pad off on there, and I lay it down there. I go over and I open up one of the boxes, and there's a whole bunch of documents with, all kinds of, letterhead on them and everything. And so I'm saying, look, if this is going to take me forever, if I start reading all these things, let me just try to find some photos. And so I went through this one, then another can of it, and then another, I think maybe the 3rd canister of this stuff. And here are these photos. And it was photos of there wasn't any doubt about what it was. It was a crash retrieval of a UFO. You could see that the UFO had crashed into this field, and there was snow on the field, and it had plowed this big gouge all the way through this field, and the dirt was all turned up and stuff, and the UFO itself was stuck in the side of this big embankment that was covered with snow, but you could tell it was like this earthen embankment. It was stuck in the side of the bank.
Do you have any idea where the UFO was, or
it was just,
who took the photo?
It was snow, and there were Air Force guys all around it. I could tell that's what they were, and it was winter. And they had the parkas on, like with a little fur around the hood stuff.
Do you think there's any chance it was fabricated for you to show you?
It would have been ridiculous to go to those lengths to set up some fake picture or something like that. I mean, it was clear. It was clear that it was, and you could see the guys taking photographs of it, and there was one like a movie camera they had that had those weird 2 canisters on the top, like this it was an old-timey kind of older version of a movie camera, and they were filming it, and there were like 3 or 4 of the different photos of it from different angles, and I could see it. In one of the photos, I could see that around the bottom of the dome, it was a classic saucer, it was like 40 feet wide, and it was stuck in the embankment, and that I could see around the base of the dome on the saucer these symbols that were all around the base of the dome. And I looked at it, and I cranked it up again so I could see the symbols, and what I did is I took out the yellow pad and I opened it up, for some reason just instinctively, I opened it up to the inside cardboard of it, and I slid it under the microfiche machine, and I focused it so that I could see the symbols, and then I traced the symbols exactly, verbatim, all the way around the half of the dome that I could see, and I just put them all. I just traced all of them, and I closed up the yellow pad, rolled up the microfiche, put it back in the little canister and put it back in the box and tied the little string on it and put it back. And I said, okay, that's it. I got him.
Wow. Did anybody else see it or no?
No. Well, Father Davis saw it.
He saw the photo?
No. He saw the tracings.
Symbols.
He saw the tracings.
Did you not want to show anybody the photo itself?
Well, I didn't have the photo itself. There wasn't any way I could get.
You were alone in the
I was just
room?
alone. I was just alone there. The 2 guys were outside the door.
Okay.
And so I had the thing traced. So I put the stuff away. I put the yellow pad under my arm again, and I just walked out. Can
you sketch the UFO?
Yeah.
I'd love to see it.
I could sketch the UFO. I can show you exactly what it looked like. Okay, so here's the photo.
Yeah.
And it's you can see the field here, and it was such that you could see the plowed. There was this thing plowed right straight through here. This is the dirt with all the dirt all kicked up all along the side of this trench, and the trench was dug all the way through the field, and the craft itself was like this, and it was stuck in the side of the hill, and the hill came down like this, and it was stuck. Well, it wasn't that tall. It was like up here, and it was stuck there. And around the bottom of the dome on top of here, there was right like this around here, there were all of these little symbols. There were these symbols that were here, and they looked like this.
Mm.
And that's what they went all the way around here.
Have you spoken to like a symbologist since then? Do you have any sense of? You
no,
should.
I hadn't. What I did is I walked out of there when I had them, and I walk out, and I walked past these 2 guys. And they were kind of surprised that I had come out of there so fast. I mean, I've kicked myself 100 times since then. Why I didn't stay in there and try to figure out more stuff. So what I did is I was kind of freaked out, that we got. Well, so I walk out of the place, and I reach down and pick up my briefcase and start just walking away from these guys, and they were kind of surprised that I'd come out of there that fast. And so as I started walking down the hall, one of them says, "Hey, hold it, what do you got there?" And I said, "Oh, this is my briefcase. I just picked up my briefcase." And he said, No. What do you got under your arm over there? And both of the guys come over to me, and they stop me, and one of them snatches the yellow pad way and ruffles through the pages, and there's nothing on them, of course, because I did it on the inside of the cardboard, on the back.
Wow.
Inside. And so they didn't even see it, and then he just hands it back to me. And so I just walk away, and I kind of go down the hallway and get back into the elevator.
Wow.
And then it was the elevator's going up. I opened up my briefcase and put it back inside and walk up.
Well, you brought up Carter's initial interest in UFOs because he saw one. Then he goes to George H.W. Bush and he says, "I want to get briefed." So H.W. Bush probably, knew a lot about the whole UFO phenomena. In 2015, 2016, when Jeb Bush, his son, is campaigning, against Trump in the Republican primary, George H.W. Bush is, helping him campaign. He's very old at the time, and he's on the stage. He's in a wheelchair, and somebody from the public in a Q&A session says, "What do you know about UFOs?" And he starts going off about how, the American public is not ready for the truth on UFOs, which is definitely off script from what he would usually say.
Yeah.
And, they just sort of slowly wheel him off the stage and, say he's like, he's not, doesn't have his marbles or whatever.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what about JFK? There's this document from 2005 it was FOIA'd in 2005. And by a guy named, I think, William Lester. And I've tried to get in touch with this guy multiple times because I want to know whether it's real or fake. It's like another thing, like the Oppenheimer thing, where it's like if Oppenheimer was involved with UFOs, that's this crazy smoking gun that would really change the public consensus. If JFK was looking into UFOs at the end of his life, and we know that also would be this really important fact for people to know. And so it's this letter that was FOIA'd in 2005, but it's from November 12th, 1963, so 10 days before he's shot in Dallas. And it's a letter from him to acting CIA Director John McCone. And he's saying, "I want all of the data on unknowns." But by unknowns, he means UFOs.
Yep.
And he's saying specifically, I'm worried about, the USSR freaking out because, they're seeing these UFOs in their airspace and they think they're acts of American aggression.
Yeah.
And so do you think that letter might have been real, or?
I mean, might have been real, might not have been. I don't know. I do know that when I was working with Dick Billings. Dick Billings was the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he was one of my investigators, actually at the Christic Institute back in Washington. And he and I were investigating the assassination because he was a very, very important guy. He's the guy that got the Zapruder film down in Dallas, and he was the guy he was the Life magazine guy for Miami, the Miami office, and was full. And he ran the Life magazine team that was on the ground in Dallas the day of the assassination. Afterwards, he's the guy that got the Zapruder film. He knows all about all that stuff. I had just been over on the Hill meeting with Tip O'Neill, and also with on the Senate side was Claiborne Pell. And showing them copies of the complaint that we had drafted.
Claiborne Pell, by the way, is super interested in parapsychology and all sorts of crazy stuff. And he was Biden's mentor all throughout his career. So anyways, keep going.
So the bottom line is I'd been over on the Hill. I was showing them copies of the complaint that we had prepared and had filed already down in Miami. Bottom line is I come back to my office, and I walk into the office, 1324 North Capitol Street, just 13 blocks from the Capitol. Walk in, and Patty Austin was my secretary. She says, "Danny, there's a older gentleman here waiting to see you." And I said, "Well, who is it?" She said, "I don't know. He didn't give me his name." And I said, "Well, where is he?" And she said, "He's up in your office, sitting, waiting for you." And so I said, "Oh, all right." So I go upstairs, I go into my office, and I walk over, and here's this guy. He looks like he's about 65 years old or something like this. And so I walk over, and I said, "Hi, I'm Danny Sheehan." He said, "Great, it's good to meet you, Mr. Sheehan," and never told me what his name was. And so I go back, and I get behind my desk, and I say, "Okay, what can I do for you?" He said, "Look," he said, "I've got a copy of your complaint here." And he pulls out a copy of the complaint, which had been sealed, actually, by Judge James Lawrence King down in Florida, just the previous Friday. And so I was kind of a little bit taken aback that he had it, and he said, you don't know who I am at all. I said, yeah, I noticed that. And he said, but look, I just want to ask you a few questions. You don't have to answer me if you don't want, but I think I might be able to help you on this. I said, okay, what? He said, now you got 29 people listed here as the defendants in your Iran-Contra, federal criminal racketeering complaint you've got filed against them. He said, who do you think is the most important? And I said, well, a lot of people would think it's because Theodore Shackley was the ADDO, the Associate Deputy Director for Operations of the CIA, running covert operations, and he was the immediate boss of the fellow who was the National Security Advisor for George Bush Sr., who's the Vice President. I said, so that, in since that's the guy in whose office they've been meeting the Iran-Contra people, and Felix Rodriguez and the guys were meeting with him, and so a lot of people would think that that's the reason I think that he's the most important. And he said, but that's not the reason why you think he's the most important. And I said, no. He said, well, why do you think he's the most important? I said because he was the CIA station chief in Miami on November 22nd of 1963. And he said there aren't two men in the world that would have answered that question that way. He said, my name is Dick Billings. I was the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I think I can help you out on this case. And that's how it started. We found out that Kennedy, on June 5th of 1963, and this would be, June, July, August, September, October, like 5 months earlier, that he had asked to be briefed on the UFO stuff. He wanted all the UFO stuff. On June 5th, that was the same day that Bobby Kennedy had been first notified about the existence of the political assassination team that had been put together by Richard Nixon back in 1960, when he was the vice president and the chair of the 5412 committee under Eisenhower.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
Do you think that the CIA killed JFK?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Not exactly, but I do know who did kill him, and I do know that it was an S-force. It was a 15-man force that was created back in 1960, actually, by Richard Nixon.
And this was the force created to go after Castro?
Kill Castro, to kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and 5 particular commandantes of the new government.
And so why did Nixon create this force?
To kill Castro. He realized actually what he did, strangely enough, is he called Howard Hughes. Was the day that Nelson Rockefeller withdrew from the Michigan state primary in the Republican presidential primary campaign, was the day that Richard Nixon knew he was going to be the Republican nominee in 1960. Okay, and he knew that this Kennedy kid, whose father, had basically bought him a seat, in the Congress, and that he was this kind of, hollow vehicle, he was going to beat him. And so what he did is picks up the telephone, the security phone in the 5412 committee of the National Security Council, and calls Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes was a secret consultant to the National Security Council. He'd invented the Glomar Explorer to pick up Russian submarines if they fail and fall to the bottom of the ocean. He did the C-5A cargo plane, the big Spruce Goose, and he was doing 2 other extremely sensitive programs.
What was he doing?
I can't tell you that, but the bottom line is he was close in.
Well, he must have been working on UFO stuff too.
No, he was not.
He wasn't?
He was not. No, they hadn't gotten him in on that. He was doing things much more kind of military, prosaic military stuff. So the bottom line is Nixon knew him because of that, because Nixon chaired the 5412 committee as the vice president under Eisenhower in 1960. So he chaired that 5412 committee that's in charge of covert operations. So he knew about him being there. And so he picks up the red phone and calls Howard Hughes and tells Hughes that he wants him to set up an assassination team to kill Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and Che Guevara, because they're refusing Nixon's demands being communicated to them that they not have any diplomatic relations with either Russia or China. He was setting that up as a condition. You know, he was invoking basically the old Monroe Doctrine. What he did is ask him to set up an assassination team. He asked Howard Hughes to do that. Howard Hughes didn't agree or disagree on the phone, being smart enough not to trust Nixon as to whether he was recording it or not. And so he didn't say yes or no, but he called in one of his lawyers, Bob Mayhew, and assigned it to Mayhew to figure out how we might do this. And so Mayhew goes, and they were in Las Vegas, where they were, right? And he goes, and Robert Mayhew goes to see Johnny Roselli. And Johnny Roselli is the bag man at the two casinos that were owned by the mafia, right? And his principal is in Chicago. He goes to see him, right? Sam Giancana, and says, "Look, so Mayhew goes to Johnny Roselli and says, look, you guys with the bent noses, you know, you got your own reason for wanting to get rid of Castro. You know, he closed down all the gambling casinos, he closed down the whorehouses, and very importantly, he closed off the heroin trafficking that was coming in through the Golden Triangle. Okay, and so therefore you got your own reasons for wanting to get rid of them. So why don't you guys do that? That Nixon's getting set to be president. He wants you to do this." And so he says, well, I can't do it without talking to Giancana, who's my principal. So he goes back to Chicago and talks to Giancana. Giancana says, well, wait a minute, this is Trafficante's territory down there. He's the Don of the Mafia in Havana. And even though he fled from Havana on January 1st of 1959, when Castro took over, so he fled and came up to Florida and was camped out in Tampa, setting up his little regime there. And a whole bunch of the other refugees that were Batista people, you know, along with Trafficante, because they were partners in the heroin trade. Batista, the dictator,
predecessor to Castro,
he was the dictator. He was partners with Santos Trafficante in the heroin operation. And the third guy in the partnership was Paul Helliwell. Paul Helliwell was the head of the Sea Supply Corporation, SEA, Southeast Asia Supply Corporation. He was full-time Central Intelligence Agency. Full-time Central Intelligence Agency.
So was this like pre-Iran-Contra or something?
All pre-Iran-Contra, all of 1960.
But it was kind of like a precursor in some ways, because were they doing the same thing, using the profits to fund
back
other revolutions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so so they said, we can't do this without Trafficante, you know, being in charge of figuring out what to do about this. So they fly down, you know, Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, and Bob Mayhew fly down to Florida, and they have 3 sets of meetings at the Fontainebleau Hotel. Now, we're getting all of this directly from Trafficante, who turns out to be the client of the firm where I was. What are these Trafficante guys doing in the Watergate Hotel? Why are they there? You know, and so that's how I found out. So Trafficante's telling us all this, so that these are the facts of what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom line is that he, after the second meeting, says, okay, I'm supportive of this in principle, but, you know, I didn't fall off no melon wagon, he said. So I wanted to make sure that this wasn't, his term, a brain fart. This wasn't some kind of brain fart, you know, of Howard Hughes, or much less Mayhew. You know, I needed to know this was coming directly from Nixon if we were going to do this. And so the next meeting shows up a guy at the third meeting that used the nom de guerre, Mr. Ed, and it was Sheffield Edwards, who's the chief of security of the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay, so he greenlights the creation of this assassination team that's designed to kill Castro, Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and Che Guevara, and these other comandantes, right? And so that goes into motion. They agree to do that. And Trafficante figures out, okay, who am I going to put together on this team? He's smart. So what he does is he picks 15 guys that are all former gunmen from him down in Havana, who had fled with him up to Florida, who'd now been recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency to form this thing called Operation 40, which is this covert operation against Cuba, burning bridges, lighting fires to their sugarcane fields, poisoning the shipments of sugar going out, doing everything to try to destroy the economy of that country, right? Because they were in defiance of Nixon, because they'd gone ahead and established diplomatic relations with both China and Russia. And so he wanted to close down their economy, to show that a socialist economy couldn't function. So the bottom line is Trafficante contacts guys that have now been hired by the Central Intelligence Agency covertly to participate in Operation 40 in covert operations against Cuba. And he selects 15 of these people, which they call a code name the S-Force.
So what happens between the S-Force and Castro?
Well, they're trying to figure out how to assassinate Castro.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out all these different ways of doing it. But in the meantime, what happens is Nixon doesn't get elected. And so that he doesn't get elected, and in comes Kennedy, and brings in his brother Bobby as the Attorney General, right? And it turns out they don't know anything about this assassination team, because it's been set up completely off the shelf like this by Nixon, right? And so that everybody just steps back and lets that team keep on going, but the Kennedys don't know about it. And so that whole operation comes down. They go through the whole Bay of Pigs thing. That falls through. And Kennedy goes down and apologizes. It literally goes down to Miami in the Orange Bowl and gathers together all these hardcore right-wing Cubano refugees and apologizes to them for this, and promises them that the free flag of Cuba will fly over the island before the end of his second term. He says that to them, right? And he comes back, and even though he told Khrushchev that he was going to stop the covert operations going on against Cuba. He was going to shut down Operation 40. He wasn't going to do that anymore. Mea culpa, sorry for doing that. 40 with an operation called Mongoose. And they set it up over at the Miami campus, University of Miami campus, in this big hangar that's there, and that Mongoose runs there. And the guys that were doing the covert operations against Cuba still, included all the guys on the S-Force who had that other hat on.
Kennedy's aware of all of this and even directing some of it. How does it end up turning on him?
No, Kennedy wasn't aware of it at all.
At all? Okay.
At all.
Okay.
At all, until June 5th.
Okay.
Until June 5th of 1963
Okay.
was when he found out that Walter Sullivan told Bobby, about it, found out about it. And then Bobby tells John, but they didn't know about it until June 5th of 1963. So that thing is going on all that time, okay? And so that the smoke is cleared on the Bay of Pigs problem. But what happens, of course, is in October of 62, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because Kennedy had lied to Khrushchev about shutting down Operation 40, and it just substituted Operation Mongoose, Nikita Khrushchev is totally pissed off. And so what he does is start...
But that's what I mean by Kennedy being aware. Is he's aware of Mongoose, but he's not aware of the S-Force.
Oh, no, but right. He knew about Mongoose.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that, but he didn't know about the S-Force.
So he doesn't know about the original intention to take out Castro.
No, he doesn't know anything about that.
Okay, got it.
Okay, and so the bottom line is that what happens is that Khrushchev is so pissed off over the fact that he's been lied to now by Kennedy, that he starts putting missiles into Cuba. Okay, and then when they find out about it in October, this whole thing comes down, which everybody knows about, and they come to within a hair's breadth of totally destroying the entire world. And Curtis LeMay and his guys, are coming up with Operation Northwoods and all that stuff of trying to figure out how to generate a war, with Russia. So the bottom line is Kennedy has to crush that whole operation to say, look, we've got to stop this. This is totally nuts. And so what he does is opens up a line of completely covert communications with Nikita Khrushchev. And he is promising him, look, you're right, I lied to you, but look, I'm telling you now, I'm telling you the truth. You and I need to do something about this. We've come just within a minute of destroying the entire planet. We've got to do something. And what they decided among themselves, in an exchange of 18 different letters that went back and forth completely secretly, outside of the channels of the State Department, outside of the channels of the CIA, that he set up a completely private operation. Kennedy and Khrushchev to each other agreed that they were going to each use their respective authority as the executives of those two countries to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of their entire nuclear arsenals, because they were each personally so totally traumatized by what had happened, or almost happened. And so that they started getting ready to do that. And what happened is Allen Dulles found out about this, who had been the first civilian head of the CIA.
Yeah, and who hated Kennedy.
He hated Kennedy.
Yeah.
You know,
over Bay of Pigs. And
hated him, the Bay of Pigs, hated because he got fired.
Yeah.
You know, but really, more importantly, and more sophisticatedly, was totally opposed to the disassembling of the nuclear warheads of the nuclear arsenal. You know, because they believed that they needed to have that against China, not against Russia. It's against China, because they'd already been shown, you know, at the reservoir in Korea and at Incheon, that the Chinese could put 1 million men in uniform into the field against you. You couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't win a traditional land war against China. So they had to have the nuclear missiles. So they viewed Kennedy as a traitor. But he was getting set to disassemble the primary military capacity that the United States had, doing it covertly with the Soviets, i.e. Khrushchev personally. Okay? And they said, that's it, that's curtains. We can't wait for an election a year from now, you know, a year and a half from now, in November of 64. We've got to get rid of him now. And so what they did is they tasked the S-Force that they knew existed, because Dulles knew that they existed, because Dulles was involved in it earlier on. Right?
So how does Dulles do that? Because Dulles leaves and joins Brown Brothers Harriman.
Yeah, he goes back to Brown Brothers Harriman, where he had, in effect, never really left. Because the Central Intelligence Agency was the brainchild of the people at Brown Brothers Harriman. You know, Robert Lovett, who was one of the senior partners there, is the one who wrote the original memo to Truman, recommending that they create a Central Intelligence Agency and that they have a covert operations capacity, which they put in Section 5412, to authorize them to engage in covert operations.
And what would Brown Brothers Harriman was just like a normal law firm at the surface, or what?
No, Brown Brothers Harriman wasn't a law firm. Brown Brothers Harriman was a collective investment company.
Oh, it was an investment company, that's right.
And they had the richest 25 patrons from the robber barons that were all investors, common investors. And they would come together and decide how they were going to direct their investments together. What they did, for example, after World War I, this gets a little complicated, but after World War I, in 1918, they had the Versailles Treaty negotiations. It turns out that the Secretary of State under Wilson, back in 1918, was a guy named Robert Lansing. Robert Lansing was the son-in-law of John W. Foster, who was the former Secretary of State back in 1893. He's the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Those are his nephews. And so what he does is, when he supervises setting up the Versailles Treaty, he brings in his two nephews as part of the team that they bring to Versailles. Those are the two guys that drafted the war reparations provisions inside the Treaty of Versailles.
But this feels like too big of a triple bank shot or something. Because you also talk about, like, it's like the Union Bank was like funding.
There was no doubt about that.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
So but do you think that the Versailles was sort of intentionally, you know, too harsh in a way that, like, made, you know, like created an auspice for the extremism of Nazism, sort of, you know, crushed Weimar Germany?
No, it started out in a much more prosaic motive. Because what they did is they said, oh, look, we're imposing the war reparations requirements of Germany through the exercise of the power of the State Department, supervising the Versailles Treaty. And so they have this major debt now that they owe to all the corporations that they had destroyed their property in the aggressive war in World War I, right? And so what they did then is, through the power of his office as Secretary of State, Robert Lansing appoints Allen Dulles, who is legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, to be the lawyer for Germany. And he conducts a negotiation pursuant to which those war reparations will be covered by Brown Brothers Harriman. They're going to extend loans to the German government to pay the war reparations, and they're going to take as security for those loans stock in all their major military industries.
That's really crazy.
In 1924, George Herbert Walker leaves Brown Brothers Harriman, sets up the Union Bank of New York, completely capitalized by the guys who were part of Brown Brothers Harriman, all the 25 investors. They capitalized the bank. They set up a foreign subsidiary up in the Netherlands called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce, that's run by Fritz Thyssen, and they finance the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich.
So crazy.
And they start funneling money to Hitler to rise up to become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. And so that they wanted Hitler to establish this kind of fascist government, the economic theory of which is you place all the instrumentalities of the government at the disposal of the interests of the private corporations, and they will then help help the major corporations. The corporations will prosper. They'll hire more people. It'll stimulate your economy. And people all the way up into the top agreed with that. That's a great idea.
The only issue is
like Henry Ford and the guys at Brown Brothers Harriman. They thought that's a good idea to do that, right?
Like Ford had ideological sympathies as well.
That was what they were doing. So that's how. And then when Hitler started coming off the leash. And deciding that he was not only going to become the bulwark, he's going to nationalize everything, he's going to take it all over. And so that ended up getting sort of out of control. They lost control of him.
But it's like, this is like a really interesting narrative that the CIA, they're set up by oligopolistic interests.
Yes. To be able to set up an economic system that was actually fascist. That was actually putting the instrumentalities of the government at the disposal of the interests of the corporations, because then the corporations could deploy, for example, sending a military expeditionary force down to Nicaragua, and ousting the democratically elected government, all on behalf of who?
Sort of Yankee imperialism. There's a book called The Three New Deals, and it was like Hitler, Mussolini, and FDR, and they were all sort of compared, and it was sort of it just shows how sympathetic the U.S. was to Hitler, just after 33 and before 38, between 33 and 38.
FDR wasn't, because they tried to assassinate him. They were planning to overthrow him.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
What's the story behind that?
1934, Brown Brothers Harriman, the people, planned to overthrow Franklin Roosevelt.
Is that true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely true.
And so
absolutely.
What was the plan there?
They tried to recruit the commandant of the United States Marine Corps, General Butler, to lead a major insurrection of the World War II veterans, against Franklin Roosevelt's government, and to oust him and to put Smedley Butler, the General Butler, in charge. In that they were going to have a fascist government. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, these are
all the Gilded Age families.
They're just the Gilded Age.
Got it. Okay, so when you say robber barons, you mean
who they are.
The Gilded Age
That's exactly right.
that
That's exactly
controlled
right.
the supply chains of the
They were
United
just
States.
very, very effective.
The Vanderbilts, were they?
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. They were very effective doing what they were doing, and that they carried what they were doing to the logical conclusions of say, well, look, why wouldn't we exercise control over the government? But that this is what was going on, and the bottom line is that after, because Hitler came off the leash and started becoming totally excessive about what he was doing in Europe, and then started going after all the Jewish people, and started doing all these kind of excessive things. Still, you need to remember, it's going to be kind of a shocking observation, but the United States never declared war on Germany.
Really?
Never did. They declared war on Japan.
After Pearl Harbor.
And then Germany declared war on the United States because they were in the Axis. Because there was this huge, powerful group inside the United States that didn't want to go to war with Germany.
The critique of FDR at the time was like he was not paying attention to any of the stuff going on with the Holocaust, and that he waited way too long, and that
he didn't want to go to. He didn't want to go to war
initially.
And then once he realized that Well, because the whole lobby didn't want to go to war against Germany.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that had created them.
But there are some rumors that he might have had pre-knowledge of Pearl Harbor.
Oh, he did. That's not rumor.
So you think that's true?
I know that's true. They lured the Japanese in because he was convinced that they were eventually going to have to go to war anyhow. And so that what he wanted to do is he wanted to rally the American people behind it. So what he did is he ordered all of the destroyers and all three of the major aircraft carriers into Pearl all at one time. And they were monitoring the Japanese trafficking, and they realized that they said, "Oh,
what's your confidence level that he had knowledge of that?"
It's 100%.
Okay.
It's 100%.
Okay.
Because we know that they had the cable traffic, they had the communications going on with all the Japanese military.
Yep.
And that they knew that they were luring them in, and once they decided they were going to do it, he sent the personal order the night before the attack on December 7th. Mm-hmm. He ordered all the aircraft carriers to leave under the cover of night. That's the key. Once you see that, they ordered them all out of there, and they let them bomb Pearl Harbor and sink a number of the fairly outmoded destroyers anyhow that they had.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Once Japan did that, then he got a declaration of war against Japan, not against Germany. And then Germany declared war on the United States.
Okay, so let's jump back to JFK. Actually,
so Brown Brothers Harriman is a very powerful center of organizing. Okay, and so that when Kennedy was deciding that he was going to do this backdoor channel thing with Nikita Khrushchev and start issuing orders to disassemble and destroy the nuclear warheads, that when Dulles found out about that, what he does goes to Brown Brothers Harriman and they give the green light, say that's it, that this guy's got to go. And he knew about the S-Force, so that they just targeted the S-Force.
Was George H.W. Bush involved in the death of JFK?
No, he was notified just before it was coming down, as Lyndon Johnson was. They were notified that this was happening because they had said, "Look, he's trying to disassemble the nuclear warheads of our whole arsenal." They all got together, J. Edgar Hoover and Nixon.
Because George H.W. Bush was CIA, and I think he went missing. The rumor was for 12 days, and there's a photograph of him in Dallas.
We know where he was. He was in
Dallas.
He was in a meeting at the ranch of Clint Murchison. Is where not the one in Oaxaca, but the one in Dallas.
So he was helping coordinate this whole thing?
No, he was just being briefed.
Okay.
He was just being notified that this was getting ready to happen.
Okay.
And so that's it.
But he had pre-knowledge of JFK's
Yes.
Death?
He did. Lyndon Johnson did. Hoover did.
The Lyndon Johnson thing makes
because it was
sense to me.
It was viewed as the patriotic thing to do, because he was a traitor in their eyes, and he was actually planning to physically disassemble the nuclear warheads and destroy them. I mean, what a greater act of treason could you do? Doing it on behest of Khrushchev.
There's so many angles to it.
And so that's why they did. That's why they felt completely self-righteous about it. They deployed the S-Force. The guy that killed him is Roger Morales. He was the dead-eye shot for the team. Off the knoll, and it turns out
he was one of the men on the grassy knoll.
Yeah, that's right, the key guy.
And what's his name?
Morales, Roger Morales.
And Cabell is one of Dulles' right-hand men, and there's this weird narrative with him where his brother is the mayor of Dallas.
That's right, Cabal.
And Cabal.
Yeah, that's right.
Was it Cabal or Cabell?
Cabell.
And his brother, the mayor of Dallas, reroutes JFK's motorcade. Is that right?
Yeah, they did. He was involved in the decision to do it. Yeah.
And there's a weird kind of UFO connection there because Cabell, CIA officer Cabell, had seen Blue Book, and he said, this is a super shoddy operation. And this is written up in Edward J. Ruppelt's book.
Yeah.
And so
he actually became part of Blue Book.
Right.
He actually had authority in Project Blue Book to fix the place up and run it. So that's all true. It's one of those data points that you have to look at and say, what does that mean? Does it mean what you think it might mean? How many things could it mean, et cetera? But the bottom line is that Oswald, the most unpopular part of this whole reality is that everybody thinking Oswald was just this innocent guy that just happened to be in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's not true at all.
Do you think he was brainwashed or coerced, or
No, I think what he did is he realized that there was a plan afoot to have him go up there and take a shot at Kennedy, not to kill him, but take the shot at him. So what they could then do is say, "Oh, look, he's connected to Cuba." That's why he did that fake the Cubans Free Cuba Committee thing.
Yeah.
And that they could blame that.
And he spent some time in Russia.
And then that's right. And then they could run and attack. He thought he was going to be the only one that was going to be taking the shot at him, and then goes to try to run away. And then they were going to eventually catch him.
Though?
Well, he was.
Or was he ideologically down to be martyr or something?
No. He just believed that it was going to work. He was going to get arrested, and then they were going to come to his aid.
Okay.
He was going to get legal defense, and he'd do all these other kind of things. But as soon as he saw Tippit coming for him, he killed Tippit. He shot and killed Tippit.
And Tippit is
the police officer that he killed.
Yeah, right.
Because Tippit was assigned to go get him.
Right. And because he had too much knowledge, you think they got Jack Ruby to kill him?
Yes.
And Jack Ruby, I think, was maybe an MKUltra patient.
It wasn't required. He was a mob guy. The mob guys were all into the assassination team and everything.
Yes, but
so it didn't require brainwashing him or anything.
Yeah, but it was really odd because he never recalled killing Lee Harvey Oswald, and as soon as he kills him, he's going, because he's a Miami nightclub guy, and all the cops around him are, arresting him, and he's going, "What are you doing? I'm Jack Ruby." And then in his jail cell for 6 months or whatever, he doesn't recall ever having anything to do with the killing.
Well,
and then he's seen by Jolly West, who we know is, ran MKUltra, was in correspondence with Sidney Gottlieb.
He also tried to get to talk to Earl Warren directly to tell him what was really going on.
Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby did.
Well, that's why you get Jolly West in there, and Jolly West spends 24 hours with him in his jail cell. No records of this, and he comes out and he says Jack Ruby has had a psychotic break, and Jack Ruby goes nuts, and he says, I'm hearing Jews screaming on the other end of my jail cell. I think they're dying or whatever. And so to me that screams that at least there he was brainwashed. I don't know about prior.
Well, what I'm saying is that with Occam's razor, applying Occam's razor, it doesn't require all of that for him to be directed by the mob
to do the initial killing.
Take out Oswald.
Correct.
Get him the hell out of there.
Correct. In fact, it would probably imply he was lucid and had some knowledge if he were brainwashed by Jolly West, which I think he was. Well, so maybe he was actually aware of what was going on when he killed him.
Yeah.
And then
that's right.
They saw him as a liability, and they had to take him out via Jolly West. Yeah.
So the plan was to simply have Oswald take the shot at Kennedy, flee, run away, get away, and have Tippit kill him. And so they'd have the lone gunman shot and killed, and it'd be over. It'd be done with, right? Which is the classic MO. Is how you do it, right? But as soon as he saw Tippit coming to see him, he shot him and killed him, and then continued to flee. And realized that he was getting screwed because he didn't know there were any other shooters. Yeah,
it is also when you read the transcript of Jackie O coming off Air Force One and being greeted by Lyndon Baines Johnson. Johnson and JFK sort of hated each other by that time.
Sure.
And I do see LBJ as sort of this ruthless guy.
President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded.
Yeah, he was that. He was that.
And like you hear, I don't know, you just read the transcript of him speaking to Jackie O, and she kind of runs into his arms, and seems freaked out. He's like, "They're gonna get us. They're gonna get us all."
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like live action role playing, like a little bit fake.
Jack Valenti. Yeah. Jack Valenti told me all about it.
Okay.
Jack Valenti was with him.
Okay, so that's right.
Jack Valenti was with him. He locked himself in the bathroom on Air Force One. He locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out. And Jack Valenti had to go and get him to take him out of there. And he was going through this whole thing. They're going to kill us all. They're going to kill us all. But he'd already been notified the previous night out at Clint Murchison's house. And there are at least 3 witnesses to testify to that.
So RFK Jr. thinks that his father was not killed by Sirhan Sirhan. Right. He was shot from the back by a guy named Eugene Thain Caesar.
I've talked to Bobby about this at length.
Who was coordinating with Bob Mayhew, he was his lawyer.
Yeah.
And so that's a crazy revelation. And I think Eugene Thain Caesar goes on to become a bodyguard at Skunk Works.
He got employed with Mayhew.
Right.
And Mayhew was working with Summa Corporation.
My understanding is that he was working with Mayhew around the time. Mayhew was clearly coordinating with him around the assassination, and then Eugene Thane Caesar went on to work at Skunk Works, but I could be wrong.
Okay,
but yeah,
but I think it was Summa Corporation,
okay.
which is Hughes' operation,
okay,
aerospace
okay.
operation,
okay.
Summa Corporation.
So yeah, what do you make of that? I mean, that's insane. That's a pretty.
Well, I try not to be insane.
Yeah. No, but it's just like a bombshell, like important, thing that people need to know.
Well, it's interesting. You know, I've talked to Bobby about it, and Bobby was going to go be meeting with the fellow to try to get him to do it, and the guy insisted upon being paid, $10,000. He wouldn't sit down and talk to Bobby at all, and Bobby just blew him off.
Who was the guy?
Yeah,
Eugene Thane Caesar.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That I was a little surprised. It seemed like it was worth 10 grand.
Yeah, that seems worth 10 grand.
If you really thought.
Although I could see not wanting to be extorted out of pride.
Yeah, right.
Your father's assassin.
That's what he did. He said, "No, I'm not going to
go away." Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty crazy story, and I think the other possibility is that Sirhan himself was an MKUltra patient.
Sure.
Because he had spent some time with William Jennings Bryan, not to be confused with the 19th century William Jennings Bryan, but the guy who was probably involved in MKUltra, and I think he was working at the Santa Ana race.
Yeah, we did the only case against MKUltra that won.
What case was that?
That there was a woman who was the daughter of a fella out on Long Island that was a tennis pro, and he, like some tennis pros, was having affairs with some of the women, the wives that were getting trained to be tennis players.
Yep.
And his wife divorced him, and he became totally depressed about being abandoned like that. And he started meeting with a friend of his who was a psychologist, and the psychologist said, you actually need to have a little bit more than just talking to a psychologist. You need to get kind of more counseling. So a friend of mine works at, I'm trying to remember which big hospital in New York City, something like Sloan Kettering or one of those big.
Yeah.
He said, my friend works there, and so you could go there and take a whole week, be there in residence, and you could have a meeting with him in the morning and a meeting in the afternoon for each day for a week. So he agrees to go do that. Well, it turns out they were doing MKUltra experiments there at the place. And so that after about 2 days of general counseling with this psychiatrist there, they dose him with a huge mass of LSD without telling him. And of course, he's totally freaked out. I mean, it's hard enough when you know what's happening, right? But he was just freaked out. And they told him falsely that he'd had a psychotic break and that he would have to stay there for a little bit longer, and they would have to help figure out what's going on here. And then like 4 days later, they give him a second massive dose, and he dies of a heart attack.
Jesus Christ.
Okay? And so they're freaking out at the place. And so what they do is they have to bring in lawyers from the Army and from the intelligence community to come in to cover for them. And it turns out that...
What was this guy's name?
I don't remember his name, because I had other lawyers do this for us, right? In the bottom, I've got it in the files, but the bottom line is that the lawyer that came in for the U.S. Army to cover it up, their involvement in this was Jacob Javits, who went on to become the United States Senator from New York. And the other lawyer that was representing the intelligence community was Warren Burger, who went on to become the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. These two guys came in and covered up that entire event that took place. And when we discovered that in the discovery, the judge said, "That's it. We're not going any farther on this case.
Really?
This is going to settle. You have her tell how much money she wants.
Really?
And you will give it to her."
Because Warren Burger had already become head of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, that's true.
That's wild.
That is true.
What do you think the purpose? Because I have some weird conspiracies about like what they tried to do with MKUltra. I don't know if you have any theories.
Well, they thought that if you dose somebody with LSD, it will dissolve away the boundaries of their concept structures. And that if one of their concept structures is that they have to remain loyal and keep secret certain information that they've got, that you'll dissolve those away.
Yeah.
And that under interrogation, you can get them to come clean and talk to you. So it started out as a device, LSD, to have a device of interrogation.
Truth serum.
Yeah.
But there was, I think, more to it as well, where they would construct killers. And I think, you know, like if you look at Jolly West, you know, he had his Center for Violence Reduction.
Yes.
And the way I think it almost worked is like, so I think like Charles Manson was an MK Ultra patient. I have a buddy in LA named Tom O'Neill.
I know all that. I know Tom.
Documents it pretty well. And so you have to ask, like, why would you make Charles Manson do what he did, possibly? And it was like, maybe it was like to make an example out of him, marginalize the, you know, the hippie movement. And, you know, you have the famous Donna Tartt line, you know, August 8th, 1968 or whatever is the, or maybe 69 is the, you know, the day that the 60s ended. And it was like, you know, everybody really, they see this long-haired guy and he seems like a hippie, but he's like actually super violent. So you make an example out of something that you want to marginalize. And so it's sort of mass pacification through local violence creation or something.
It's conceivable, but on the other hand, like, conceivable isn't the standard. Because there's lots of things that are conceivable, you know, and there are a lot of them. And as people fixate on something that is conceivable that happens to correspond to their worldview.
Is there an MK Ultra UFO connection?
I mean, you know, as we get to the issue of the UFO stuff, there's all kinds of issues that are involved in consciousness. In the states of consciousness, the elevation of consciousness, all of that stuff, which relates tangentially, at least, to the LSD, you know, that is involved in the UFO stuff. The entire remote viewing process, the entire psychic process, all that stuff with Hal Puthoff, with Russell Targ and all those folks. That whole element of consciousness is a very big deal.
The UFO thing is so confusing because, okay, you have different threads. You have this like consciousness thread where it's like, I don't know if it's Kabbalah or like certain people can summon this stuff, but like you sort of intend on the thing happening. You know, Greer has CE5 or whatever. This stuff sort of enters your orbit, and like that feels different to me than like nuts and bolts craft.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
It is, but it's all part of a specific phenomenon, you know. And as long as you confine it to looking at the UFO stuff, and what's good, you know, the fact that the UFOs appear to be navigated telepathically, for example, and that the craft have built into it some kind of an AI capacity to respond telepathically to the control of the pilot. You know, that's pretty far out, you know, when you get into that stuff. And so the whole question of how telepathy works, you know, what are the physiological aspects of telepathy, like that, and remote viewing. You know, I mean, you know, the stuff that Pat Price could do. You know, I mean, you know, how the hell do you explain that? You know, and when you start focusing on that, trying to get an understanding of what that is, you realize that there's.
Do you think you can turn that into math or repeatable science, or do you think it's this inherently kind of ephemeral thing?
No. I believe that it's reductionable. You know, to some subtle dimensions of physics. There's not any doubt about it. It's going on. And there's something to it.
Or it would point to the human as the carrier of all knowledge. And there's something actually like the senses, the sensory world is actually a reduction on a default state of greater omniscience. And if you read Plato with more of a belief that maybe he believed in the ontological truth of what he was talking about, and you read like the myth of air or you know, some other things he sort of hinted at, maybe, you know, there's much deeper knowledge that's kind of latent and innate inside a human being.
All true. That is all true.
Okay.
That is all true. Yeah.
You think so?
I'm sure. I'm sure that's true. Yeah. And what I'm in the process of doing is, and they know that I'm doing it. I mean, you know, Lou didn't just hire anybody. You know, didn't retain just anybody to be his lawyer. I mean, he knew perfectly well that for 20 years I was legal counsel for the Disclosure Project. He knew I represented Dr. John Mack. He knew that I was at the peer group.
That's interesting, though, that you represented both Greer and Elizondo, because they hate each other, right?
It's unfortunate.
Why do they hate each other so much? Because
it's unfortunate.
Greer, obviously, you know, both of them have their fair share of critics. But Greer, to me, like he's more right than like, you know, like there's something about the presentation of the guy that I kind of detest or something. Like it's just sort of really ridiculous, megalomaniacal. and yet, like, I think a lot of the stuff he says, he was early on so much. And I think a lot of it probably checks.
Well, I mean, why does anybody hate anybody if they really know? I mean, the more you know, the more you forgive.
Yeah.
For why people do what they do.
Uh-huh.
That I don't think people hating each other is very constructive. But I know that it's not a good idea for them to hate each other.
Yeah.
That there's a constructive relationship that could be formed.
Do you think Nixon was pretty interested in UFOs? Because there's a famous Jackie Gleason.
I know the Gleason thing.
Yeah,
I know about that. That he was. I guess you could call it. Had more or less kind of a prurient interest in it.
Yeah.
It was kind of this kind of itch that he had to kind of know. But he was so involved in so many kind of low consciousness things that were going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was kind of above his, not his pay grade, but his kind of level of consciousness. That it was just something he couldn't probably figure out how to use it.
Yeah.
Politically, he was very smart and very crafty, and just didn't fit into anything as far as he could tell, I think.
5 men apparently caught in the act of burglarizing and bugging Democratic headquarters in Washington.
The Watergate thing just seems like it's so crazy, and it seems like this, like all these deeper layers than other people as to how it went down.
I do.
And so, what's your version of the story, high level, and then we can get into some of the deeper names and narratives and that sort of thing.
The high level is that the key to it is that there were 4 Trafficante guys. Mm-hmm. There was E. Howard Hunt, mm-hmm. who was the liaison to the Everglades operation in Operation Mongoose.
He also said he was involved in the JFK assassination, and he said that JFK was killed over UFOs.
Well, his son says he said that. It wasn't he said it.
Okay, he didn't say that. Okay.
And then Frank Sturgis mm-hmm. was on the team mm-hmm. that did the burglary. Mm-hmm. He was the liaison out on Swan Island.
Okay.
For that group.
So it's the same S-Force guys, or whatever.
They're S-Force guys.
Yeah.
Right. So those are both S-Force guys, and the Cubans were S-Force guys. Mm-hmm. And then they had McCord, who was there, who was the CIA wiretapping specialist. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so when I was brought on to
Dulles once called McCord the best guy I ever had, or something.
Yeah. Well, in what Nixon said, literally in the smoking gun thing, if you peel off that scab, there's an awful lot of stuff that could come out that we don't want out. And he was referring to Hunt. Okay, and that whole smoking gun. And when you look at the smoking gun conversation on the 21st of June, with Haldeman and Nixon on the tapes, that Haldeman comes into the office and says, "Mr. President, I think we've got a problem here." He said, "What is it, Bob?" He said, "Pat Gray, who's the new FBI director, that had just been installed because Hoover had died." He says, Pat Gray has called, and they got a problem. That the FBI people are insisting upon going down and investigating the bank down in Mexico City, where those bills came from that were in Bernard Barker's pocket. And he wants to know if that's going to cause any trouble for the White House. And Nixon says, Bob, what I want you to do is I want you to go and get John Ehrlichman. I want you to go over to the agency, and I want you to see Vernon Walters in Dick Helms, and you tell him right now to contact the FBI and tell them to get the hell out of that part of the investigation. And Haldeman says, well, what am I going to tell him to say? And he said, you just tell them if they dig into that part of this investigation, all the Mexico stuff about the Cuban guys are all going to come out. That's Oaxaca. That's the Cuban guys that are being trained in the assassination.
Whoa.
Because that bank account where those monies came out of where those bills were in Bernard Barker's pocket was in the bank account of this lawyer by the name of Vigario, which is where they put the money from the skim off the casinos through Marcelo or New Orleans and into the Miami National Bank of Meyer Lansky. And they would wire it into the bank account down in Mexico City to pay the cost of that triangular fire team base. That's where the money came from that was in the pocket of Bernard Barker. And so the question is, if anybody punched into that, where does it lead to? You know, it leads to the Kennedy assassination. Right there. And so Nixon was terrified.
He's like, don't peel off.
He was terrified because the guy whose office they were in the DNC, Larry O'Brien, before becoming the new head of the DNC to run the campaign against Nixon in '72, had been the major lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for Howard Hughes.
Wow.
And Nixon knew it. And Nixon went, oh, shit. He said, if Larry O'Brien was told about what we did back in 1960, creating that assassination team, that's going to lead back to the fact that they're the ones that killed the president, because he knew they're the ones that killed the president. And there wasn't any way that he was going to be able to convince anybody that he wasn't behind it, because he's the one that organized the assassination team that ended up killing the president. And so he freaked out, and he said, you've got to get that shut down. You've got to find out whether he's going to say anything about it.
That's really interesting.
So you go into his office. I want you to bug his phones, and I want you to. He didn't say it there.
So his paranoia really did him in. He was trying to overcorrect for the fact that they would
trying to shut that thing down.
That's fascinating.
Okay, and so that's why they went in, and that's why you had to have guys from the shooter team that were in there, because they had to know what they were looking for. Okay, and nobody else could know what they were looking for, so you couldn't bring anybody else to do it. And you say, what the hell are these Trafficante guys doing in there? You know, and so that was the question I asked. I was assigned to go back to Washington to monitor the hearings, the Watergate hearings that were going on, right? And so they were going to have one of the hearing things, and it was televised. So I was sitting in the Gold Key Motel with my investigator, William Johnstone Taylor, who was the protege I mentioned to you, to Bad Andy Tooney, who headed up the Moriarty and Associates investigative firm. He's my guy, right? 3-tour Vietnam, CID, Marine Corps guy, right? And he's sitting there, and they bring on to testify Jerry Alch, who was listed as the official attorney for James McCord, and he comes on in Dan Inouye,
Hawaii.
From Hawaii. And what's his name from North Carolina, Sam Irvin, are interviewing him, right? And Dan Inouye says, Mr. Alch, he said, you're partners with, you represent James McCord, is that correct? And he said, yes. He said, you're the law partner of Lee Bailey, aren't you? And he said, yes, I am. He said, now, isn't Mr. Bailey under indictment down in Florida on a charge of mail fraud? And he said, yes, but that's going to be dismissed right away because I'd already filed the motions to dismiss it, which we won. All right. So he said, well, that's just going to be dismissed right away. So they said, yes, but in a way he says, well, couldn't one get the sense that Mr. Bailey might be attempting to keep McCoy, James McCord, from testifying in order to do a favor for somebody very high up in the administration in exchange for getting good treatment on his criminal case? And Jerry said, hey, but that isn't true. And what happened is just as that testimony was going to come in, Lee Bailey walks into the hotel room where we are. He comes walking in, and he's standing there listening to this testimony. And he hears the testimony, and he turns around and walks out into the hall, and we heard him slugging quarters into a payphone, which was totally weird because he used to carry this briefcase around that had a telephone in it. And he would kind of move away from all of us, and he'd go over to a place where nobody could be around, and he would open up the suitcase, and he'd pull out the antenna, and he would have this telephone but he could talk to somebody that he was talking to a bunch of times. And we couldn't figure out what this was. And even Bad Andy didn't know who that was, right? So Billy, so he just says that. He goes out in the hall, and we hear him putting the coins in the phone. And I turned to Bill Taylor, and I say, what the hell is this all about? And he said, I don't know. I said, find out. Okay? And so he goes and talks to Bad Andy. And then Bad Andy didn't want to tell him. Said, no. He says, you guys are good boys. You don't want to get involved in any of this kind of stuff, he says. And you don't say that to a private investigator. You don't really want to know. And so he said, so Bill said, yes, I do. I want to know. He kept leaning on Bad Andy. And Bad Andy is the one that brought him into the private investigation firm because he's an old Marine Corps guy, right? So anyway, so Billy keeps after him. Finally, he says, look, here's the story. It turns out that Lee is on Index 4 for the agency. He's one of the 4 attorneys that are on retainer for the Central Intelligence Agency, so that if any CIA operative is caught stateside, engaged in a covert operation, which is totally forbidden by the National Security Act of 1947, that he's one of the lawyers that will be retained. That's why James McCord has reached out to him.
This was after Watergate?
This is during the Watergate hearings.
Yeah.
This is after Watergate.
Because McCord was let off for right, like within 4 months. Or so he was given 1 to 5 years.
McCord is the guy that wrote the letter to Judge Sirica, blowing the whistle on Nixon.
Exactly.
And the plumbers. He's the guy that did that, right?
Yeah.
Out of our office.
Yeah.
So that I'm sitting there.
So why wasn't Nixon set up in this model of what happened? Because McCord's this sort of deep CIA guy who's very close with Dulles.
No, because we know that Nixon is the one that ordered the break-in. He wasn't being set up. He's the one that ordered the break-in in order to see whether Larry O'Brien...
Yeah, but then they sold him out afterwards.
Well, so you have to separate out. So it wasn't done to set him up. Okay, but so what happened is McCord, out of our office, is the one that gets pissed off over the fact that he thinks they're all getting sold down the stream here. And he's saying, "What's the story?" He says, "Look, I was told that this was because he wasn't briefed in.
Got it.
He didn't know.
Got it.
He was just putting the wiretap equipment and stuff in.
Got it.
And he was told the reason they were doing this is because they thought that the DNC was helping to coordinate anti-Vietnam demonstrations.
Got it.
And that they were therefore engaged in national security
So he thought he got sold out.
And he thinks he got sold out. So he got pissed off about this. And so he writes the letter to Sirica, right? That's what happened. I mean, and we know exactly what happened. So when I find out, when Taylor gets all this information from Bad Andy, they lay it out to us in detail. He went down to Hank Gonzalez's. Hank Gonzalez is officially, technically, the lawyer for Trafficante. He was just a cover for Bailey. Right?
But then who ends up helping out Woodward and Bernstein? So Deep
That
Throat.
was Mark Felt.
So I still don't understand.
Mark Felt was getting. He's the guy that was insisting upon going down the next morning to Mexico to investigate the bank account.
Wow.
That was Mark Felt. He was going down to follow the money. Where did that money come from? They tracked it back to that bank.
But if he's the deputy director of the FBI, right, Mark Felt, and then he's acting as this sort of anonymous tip-off guy for Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post, doesn't that again point towards this sort of coordinated effort against Nixon, where he's sort of trying to like expose this to the citizen press?
What's happening? Mark Felt was still pissed off that he'd been passed over for the head of the FBI, right? So he was that.
So it was pure revenge,
personal grudge,
spite,
because he was pissed off that they were trying to cut him off. He was trying to go down and do that investigation, legitimate investigation of what the hell happened here, and Gray was telling him not to go.
Okay.
Because Gray had called the White House and said, "Look at I've got FBI people that are wanting to go down and do the investigation of this bank." That's when Nixon said, "Go get the agency to shut them off. So tell them they can't do this."
So Felt's motivation was basically, he was pissed personally.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do the investigation that would have led him to the original S-Force setup
So
and
he
stuff.
he would find, well, he didn't know what it was going to lead to.
Yeah, but it would have.
It would
led
have.
him to, and then
Absolutely
and then
would
James
have.
McCord was pissed that he was getting sold out.
That's right, sold down the river.
And it was given, not the right information as to why he was
That's
going
exactly
into
right.
the DNC.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Very interesting.
And so that when we get this information from Trafficante, or Bill Taylor and I say, holy shit, look what we're in the middle of here.
Yeah.
That we now know that in fact the assassination team that was created back in 1960 by Richard Nixon are the ones that killed the president.
Isn't it wild that a mob boss drug dealer knows more about the true history of American politics than the average American citizen?
Oh no, that's not surprising.
It's not
surprising
to you.
that almost anybody knows more than the average citizen in the United States
Yeah,
about
but
anything.
it'd be surprising to somebody off the street.
Do you think there was or could have been a CIA conspiracy to remove you from office?
I don't know. I know many people think so. I would say that I've found it difficult to understand why the CIA, which apparently had advanced knowledge of the break-in, didn't inform me. I've found it difficult to understand how it could have been that at least 2 of those involved had CIA connections, and nevertheless that it was not brought to my attention as far as the break-in occurring.
Here's another weird connection that you might be familiar with. So, we talked about G. Gordon Liddy, and we talked about Bob Mayhew.
Yeah.
There are photos with both of those guys and John Lear. And John Lear is very involved in the Bob Lazar stuff. And so when I talk to like Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, I don't understand why they're so dogmatically like pro Lazar being at least accepted at face value. Because I'm like, look, I'm not discounting your reporting. Like, I think the reporting was good. Yeah. But the idea that this wasn't pushed out by the CIA, I think is just, it's like you're not able to think properly about this. Because you had this guy in John Lear, who's son of Bill Lear. Whether he was a useful idiot or an agent provocateur, I don't know. Probably useful idiot. I don't know. But he had been spending a decade outside of Area 51. And you spend a decade outside of Area 51, the security guards know you there. Like, this is all documented. Why the hell would they not do a basic background check on Bob Lazar, know that he's best friends with the guy camping out and, sketching all these kind of exotic aircraft around Area 51? That would be number one. Number two, why would you continue to have him fly cargo jets for you, and be a pilot for you for various missions into the 80s, which, he says he disaffiliated in 83, but he really disaffiliated much later.
Let me tell you a story to make you even more confounded.
Please.
Right? I'm at Jesuit headquarters here in Washington, D.C., right? And I get a call on the phone, and it is, what's his name? Guy that owned Rebel magazine, and Larry Flint, right? So I get a call from Larry Flint. You know who this guy is?
I don't actually.
Larry Flint's the guy that owned like 30 different magazines. Okay. Rebel magazine and Gent and these skin magazines and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
He had gotten sued for libel because in one of the magazines that he published, someone wrote a story using a woman who won the Miss, Oklahoma or something beauty contest. And so she filed a lawsuit against him and won. And the case had gone all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and his lawyers were challenging it as a violation of the First Amendment, right? Anyway, he's coming into Washington, D.C. to go to the Supreme Court argument. He calls me on the phone. He says, Dan, he says, Larry Flint here. I went, okay, yeah, okay, Ms. Flint, what? He said, well, I'm coming in town for the Supreme Court argument. I'd like to have a meeting with you if I could. Could you come and see me tomorrow? I'm going to be staying at the Park Hotel. And so I say, okay, what's it about? He said, I can't talk with you on the phone about it. So the next day, I get Father William J. Davis, who was my Jesuit superior at the headquarters, right? And we jump in the Blue Flame, his little car. We drive over to the hotel, right? And here are like 4 of these big stretch limos all parked in front of this hotel, which is the Larry Flynt entourage that are all there, right? So we go into the lobby, and we say, you know, my name's Attorney Dan Sheehan, Father Bill Davis. We're here to see Larry Flynt. Oh yes, he said. You know, and they bring us over to this elevator, and they bring us up to the top floor of the penthouse, right? We get out the elevator, and here's Larry Flynt in his gold-plated wheelchair, right? Because he got shot. Somebody tried to assassinate him. So he's in this gold-plated wheelchair, and he brings us into the side room, and he said, look, I want to retain you at this the Christic Institute that you guys have. We'd like to retain you to investigate the death of Savage. What was her first name? She was the original hostess of Frontline.
Okay.
When it first started.
Yep.
On PBS.
Yeah.
Right. Jessica Savage. Her name was.
Yeah.
And she and her husband had driven off a bridge in the middle of some storm, and he'd gotten drowned and killed. And he said, I think that was a murder. And I want to retain you guys to do the investigation. You guys did the Karen Silkwood investigation. You've done all these kind of things. And so I said, no, well, we don't, you know, we're a 501c3 public interest group. You know, we don't get hired to do investigations. I said, you could make a contribution to us if you wanted to.
Yeah.
It's all tax deductible. And I said, and we could then look into this if we figure out that there's some sort of major public interest thing here, that this was a murder and she's a major reporter and there's something important, you know, we could then, you know, make that public. And he said, well, would you do this? Would you just let me know first so I could publish it in my magazine, in Rebel magazine, and I'll give you guys the $1 million contribution. And I said, I think we could do that. He said, but there's one thing, he said. I've got an investigator that I'd like to have work with you on this. And I said, no, that's not how we do it. You know, we've got our own investigators, because I had not only the guys, Bill Taylor and the guys that were in Moriarty, who still kept doing stuff for us for free, but I also had all the Jesuit guys, 42 countries all around the world that are giving information to our headquarters, right? So I said, no, I said, we'll do this ourselves. You know, just let me introduce you to them, right? And he dials the phone, and the door opens up, and in walks G. Gordon Liddy. Walks into the room, and I looked at him, and he comes over and he sticks his hand out like that. And I said, excuse me. I said, you know, I told you we're not going to be dealing with anybody that you want to put in, and especially him. And Liddy turned to Flint and he said, see, I told you he wouldn't do it. So we say, no, we're not going to do this. And we don't know whether he was going to give us the $1 million or not. So I go downstairs, and I go down the elevator, and I'm starting to walk out of the hotel. All of a sudden, somebody hollers and says, Mr. Sheehan. And I said, yes, yeah, what is it? And I go over, and it was Gordon Novell.
Who is that?
Ah, good. You don't know? No. Gordon Novell is the guy that was arrested and prosecuted by James Garrison in New Orleans for burning down 555 Camp Street, the office where Lee Oswald had the office, along with what was his name? The guy that was the hardcore right-wing guy that was the head of the Latin American Anti-Communist League. One of the guy that was the former FBI guy that was down in New Orleans. The heck was that guy's name? But anyway, he had an office in the exact same building, on the exact same floor. Whoa! With him, and Gordon Novell was prosecuted and convicted for burning down that building in the midst of the investigation.
That's crazy.
Okay, and so it gets crazier. Okay, so he says, I want you to represent me. I want to get that criminal conviction of me expunged. And I said, well, you've already been convicted of it, you know, and that was years ago, you know, and you've already served the time and everything for it. He said, you don't do that. He said, no, I want you to, you know, get that expunged for me. And so I said, I I don't know anything about it, but here's my card. You can call me if you're. So I go back to the office, and a few days later he calls and he says, "How's that investigation going?" And I said, "No, I said I haven't agreed to the investigation." He said, "What? You son of a bitch!" He said, I confided in you. And he threatened to kill me. Gordon Novell, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Gordon Novell ends up later being hired by John Alexander.
Whoa.
To be one of the investigators for NIDS.
Whoa.
To go around, trying to make people who are contactees come and give them the information.
Yeah.
And he's a spotter for people who are getting abducted.
Whoa.
Through my lab.
Crazy.
Abductions, right? And that's him. Okay, and so Gordon Novell, years later...
And you're implying that he was kind of part of the cover-up of the JFK assassination.
I'm just telling you what the facts are.
Well, the facts are weird.
The facts are weird.
Burned down 555 Camp Street,
facts are
which
weird.
Was being used as what by Lee Harvey Oswald?
That was an office for the Free Cuba group.
Okay.
The alleged Cuba group.
Right.
And this guy, Ben or Bert, whatever his name was, had his office right next door to him.
So Gordon Novell pops back up as this UFO.
He pops, later, because I'm out, 1994, I'm out, representing Dr. John Mack, and I was asked to do a presentation at the International UFO Congress. And so I'm doing a report on the International UFO Congress, and all of a sudden, Gordon Novell walks up out of the crowd and says, "Oh, Mr. Sheehan," he said, "look, I've got all these drawings and stuff about the UFOs and how their propulsion system works and all that kind of stuff, and he starts showing them to me, and he said, I've been working on these things and had a lot of time when I was in prison to do this, and I'd like to have you represent me to, get my stuff patented here." He says, "That's Gordon Novell." And I'm saying, "Excuse me." I said, I don't think you quite remember, you're threatening to kill me,
a
number of years ago. Wow, he says, I didn't really mean that. And I said, and that was the last I had anything to do with him. Okay, so what does all that mean? What exactly does all that mean? That what I just sort of put it on the wall.
Yeah.
It's one of the cards on the wall.
Yeah.
To see, where, and you have the threads, the nylon threads that you put between the cards and figure out what's going on here. But there's lots of weird stuff. Lots
of weird stuff.
Lots of weird pieces. And those are all little data points because I know those things to be absolutely true. But, the reality is that during the Karen Silkwood case that we did, that Karen Silkwood is this young 29-year-old health and safety person at a nuclear reprocessing plant. It wasn't a nuclear power plant. It was the sole place where they were trying to bring the spent fuels from the 103 nuclear power plants and then grind it all up into powder and then put it in centrifuges and centrifuge out the plutonium and then recover the plutonium and then bring it to the fast flux test facility at Hanford. It was an attempt to figure out what to do with the waste materials. The bottom line is that she discovered that they were missing 40 pounds of 98% bomb-grade plutonium from this facility, and she just concluded that it must have meant that they were really sloppy, that they must have be loose around the planet or around the plant somewhere, and she didn't. So she called the union people that were trying to organize a union at the plant and told them that, oh, look how sloppy they are. They're missing 40 pounds of 98% bomb-grade plutonium. It was going to Israel. For nuclear weapons in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Really?
Yeah, and not only that, but they had to then share it with Iran as a condition under the Shah. And then the two of them had to...
No way!
Yeah, it was all true. And...
who was facilitating this on the American side?
The Central Intelligence Agency, Theodore Shackley, who was the temporary guy on the Israeli desk, but he had been the former Saigon station chief that ran the assassination program in Southeast Asia too. But so that what I'm saying is that she didn't know what was happening, but that when she got killed on the way to meet with the New York Times reporter to bring him the documents, David Burnham, who was figuring there's a rat in the woodpile here somewhere. This isn't just missing in the plant. And she got killed, run off the road. They rammed her car and ran her off the road and killed her and took the documents out of the car. And this is a real story. This is a really true thing that happened. And I was in charge of the investigation to investigate what happened. People came up with all kinds of nefarious theories as to what could have happened here and who could have done this and all that. And I had to keep drilling through all of these different theories of what's going on here to figure out exactly what did happen. And what I discovered is that people, what they assumed at least half a dozen different theories of what was going on. And what I discovered is that a little bit of 2 or 3 of the different theories were true, but no one of them was true. But there were pieces of what each of them had that they're the ones that really came together to explain what actually had happened.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered that over and over and over again.
What's your process? I feel like you have to hear something and then catalog everything as like possible but low probability, and then you wait for corroboration.
It comes from, I was trained.
But I think people a priori discount things they hear too much because they're too epistemically closed. So they're like, it's like Bayesian reasoning where it's all based on
theorem.
Prior evidence.
Yeah.
But if you have this like a priori bias, every time you hear somebody say, hey, I saw a weird thing in the sky, your Bayesian reasoning is going to be totally off because you're just putting this in the junk pile when it shouldn't be. It should just be like, you're open to everything.
The person that I had trained me in this is Lawrence Tribe. Larry Tribe, who is now renowned as the leading American constitutional lawyer, but he was a summa cum laude mathematics graduate from Harvard College, and then went and got his PhD summa cum laude from Harvard in mathematics. And at the age of 25, was the head of the United States Bureau of Statistics. At the age of 25, this guy. And he got bored with that after a few years and decided he was going to law school, went to Harvard Law School, became the captain of the varsity debating team for Harvard University, and still ended up number 2 in his class at Harvard Law School. This guy's a totally brilliant guy. And he started out teaching evidence at Harvard and started explaining to us how you go about setting out your options in Bayes' theorem, in the whole thing. And he started explaining that's right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
When I learned that, and then ended up at F. Lee Bailey's office where I had access to 40 Class A licensed private investigators.
Yeah.
I could put that kind of investigative skills together with working through these different theorems of how things are going. And so that's how I've ended up being, I guess it might account for how I end up in these peculiar places.
Yeah.
Because I've been able to not get drug off onto some one theory of something.
I try to do the same thing, and I think being outside of academia helps us.
Yes.
Because academia, you become criticized, and you have to kind of tiptoe around anything too bold or too.
Because they're not designed to really forward the human knowledge in any kind of significant way. It's all nibbling at the edges.
I was just with Eric Weinstein and a bunch of other pretty renowned scientists, and I've worked with Eric for a while, and Eric is using basic Bayesian reasoning, and he's obviously has his own sort of theory of everything in math and physics.
Yep.
Has come to the conclusion that he thinks maybe there's a good chance that the U.S. has a secret physics program behind the kind of exoteric layer of physics, which that's a wild revelation. That he says names people, John Wheeler, Bryce DeWitt, Freeman Dyson. People like that who were, renowned in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And he thinks that maybe there was something going on in the background with them, and maybe they were actually interfacing more with aerospace than meets the eye, even Feynman.
Yep.
And so, it's very interesting, the conclusions you come to once you become open-minded.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, it took the New York Times and the Pentagon saying this stuff is real for them to kind of open the possibility space on everything else. Because if it is real, it has to shatter everything else. You have to be physics, religion, everything. It has to affect you. And the one argument I'd say against not trying to piece it all together, I do think having one theory of everything allows you to You know, you want if you have a bunch of high strangeness events, a bunch of anomalies. It's like you have Bigfoot here, and you have orbs over there, and you have cattle mutilation, and all these things. It's really hard for the average person to not just say that's a basket of crazy. It's like it's an amalgamation of crazy that doesn't fit neatly to, you know, science is supposed to be repeatable and predictable. Yeah. And so I do think the theorizing does help get this stuff across the line.
Yeah, and usually that I'm involved in a litigation, you know, that requires, you know, you're going to have to put the stuff in front of a jury, and you're going to have follow the rules of evidence, and you're going to have the judge sitting there in your face, you know, trying to keep you from putting things in that he or she just doesn't want in, you know, because they think that they have their own judgment that might not be realistic or true, and so they don't want you putting it in front of the jury because they think they're in charge of the courtroom. You know, there's all kinds of things you have to do, but it lends a certain kind of focus to what you're doing, and you don't just aimlessly speculate about things.
Given that, sometimes I think the metaphysical conversations are frustratingly unfalsifiable. They're not. They're sort of not even wrong, as Feynman would say. And so there's almost a part of me, it's like we should look back at this history in the 50s and 60s in the US where there's some interesting people claiming Robert J. Oppenheimer set up UFO secrecy. Like Rush has said that on record in an interview with me. Let's talk to his grandchildren. Let's talk to, you know, anybody who was alive at that time and try to corroborate that. There's something about renowned scientists. We just spent $130 million on a Christopher Nolan movie about this guy. He's like a, you know, the emblematic kind of American scientist mid-century. Yeah. If he had anything to do with the UFO story, any smoking gun evidence around that would be this massive update, I think, for the average person who's just seen that movie and is interested in this character. Yeah. And so I do think sometimes the conversations are sort of frustratingly woo-woo, and we could just move it into this territory of like, okay, but what about Oppenheimer? Or, you know, what about these people?
Yeah. Well, this is all an epistemological question. What is the methodology that a given person utilizes to try to determine for themselves what's true and what's not? You know, and the reality of it is that 99% of the people don't have the time or the disposition to be trying to find out things for themselves. Yeah. And so that they just have certain authority figures that they look to that tell them, you know, and you're trained to that. Yes. You know, from the time you're in school, oh, your teacher is the one that knows, here's Mr. Policeman who's coming in to show you how you get across the street safely, and they're the ones that you need to rely upon.
Or the media.
You know, here's the you know, here's the New York Times, or here's NBC. You know, and what they do is they offer to you different epistemological sources of authority, and the people do not engage in trying to figure things out for themselves.
Not at all.
Okay, and so given that reality, what happens is that when you introduce into that setting a national security state, such as we did at the end of World War II, where we set up a central intelligence agency, and that their job is to deceive people and to try to engage in a greedy, avaricistic world domination endeavor, you know, and view themselves in this dialectic with the Soviet communism, who they think is trying to take over the world too, and they're projecting their shadows on each other, you know, and you start to distort reality intentionally. Yes. And then what they do is they target the epistemological sources of authority and penetrate them. What I've been doing all the time is I just take in the information, store it away, put it as a card up on the wall.
Do you know who Dr. Eric Walker is?
No.
Well, there was so you know Robert Sarbacher, do you know that name? Or so Sarbacher is a guy who's like an atomic energy expert, and he was working at the Washington National Labs. There were rumors that maybe he had taken over parts of, you know, the Manhattan Project post-Oppenheimer in the 50s. Yeah. And he was closely coordinated with Thomas Townsend Brown, and he was definitely involved in some weird stuff, you know, he would put cameras on these sort of modified V2s, and they would try to take photos of UFOs. It was a Sisyphean effort that didn't end up sort of working out. In 1987, this UFO researcher named William Steinman writes to him, and he says, you know, was there actually a UFO program? I need to know, blah, 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 blah. And Sarbacher says the rumors about the UFO crashes are fundamentally correct, quote unquote. And I say that because fundamentally correct was actually kind of nomenclature between him and Thomas Townsend Brown, where if you say substantially correct or fundamentally correct, you were saying you're probably right on the surface level, but you're wrong on like just about everything else or something.
Right.
And then he goes on to say, von Neumann, Oppenheimer, Vannevar Bush were all involved in this core program in the 40s and 50s. And I actually do know a guy who might, be able to point you in the right direction right now. And he describes a guy who kind of matches the description of this guy, Dr. Eric Walker, who's an engineer at, and he's actually the president of Penn State. Wow. And so they go and they go into Eric Walker's office, and they're like, "Do you know anything about the UFO stuff?" And he looks at them.
Just cold call, right?
Yeah.
Right.
He just approach
right
him.
Here. I just happened to walk in and ask you.
Yeah. Well, he probably maybe had office hours because of the university president. So he's probably used to meeting people. And he gets like kind of shocked, but then he kind of regains his composure, and he goes, "Yeah, I've known about this for a long time." And he's like, "But I would know if you guys were clued in, and I know you're not." And then he says, "You're chasing windmills," kind of quoting Don Quixote.